Hello and welcome to Watchmen. I am one of your hosts, Chris Hardman. I'm here with Leiland Tanner, your other host, and we have a special guest today, Mitch Weight. And this week we are talking about Ezra's Eagle, which I know many of you have heard of, but we were both kind of surprised in how many people hadn't heard of it. So we think it's a good thing to talk about. It's, in my opinion, like, look, there's a lot of second coming prophecies, and we're going to probably get to witness all of them. But this seems the most pressing to me because this one's happening now. It's like right now. And especially with the stuff that's been happening with Trump being found guilty and some of the politics we've seen and war ramping up, this is very relevant to literally today. So, you guys want to throw anything in there to this intro before we get started?
I know it's Bilderberg week, and you've got now the Biden trial. You've got all kinds of stuff going on in the world that could just feel crazy. But just think of that as the soap opera. Like, it's okay to push pause on that, and you can tune in once a week or a few times a week to get your fix, and it'll still be moving slowly down the road like a big wheel. But I agree with Chris here that this prophecy and understanding it, I think it's critical right now because we're living it. And so it gives us an opportunity to exercise faith by praying about it, by asking the Lord questions about it and the things that you're witnessing and seeing in your daily life. Like, it's hard to avoid the things that are being affected by this prophecy and the things that it says will happen here in the near future. So getting a glimpse of it and an understanding of it, I think, will make it so that it's a benefit to us in our faith, in seeing how the Lord works through prophets and through prophecy, but also in allowing us to explain and calm and bring peace to others, as I think and believe confusion will continue to increase as this intensifies.
Yeah, I'll add to that. I think Ezra's Eagle has kind of become the litmus test or the benchmark as people, as people come and reach out to me to see, one of our dwelt locations or to try to understand what we're trying to accomplish with dwelt. They'll reach out to me, and like every time somebody comes down to see, they're like, yeah, I'm interested in the homesteading and blah, blah, blah. And then they'll say, have you heard of Ezra's Eagle? I'm like, dude, of course I've heard of Ezra's Eagle. Are you kidding me? But there's a bit of confidence if you can say, hey, have you heard of Ezra's Eagle? And the other person says, yes, here's my opinion on it. Then it's like, okay, this person is inquisitive. They have gone to the Lord. They are, a student of eschatology. They want to understand and make sense of what's going on in the world so that they can stand steadfast and immovable and stand in holy places so that they can be around through all of this and afterward to help gather Israel and build the New Jerusalem and be part of the kingdom, one of the servants that's out there, like working in the vineyard. Like, Ezra's Eagle has become the thing that inside the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and outside the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, people are saying there is so much to this that I can't avoid listening to it. I have to understand because it's the play-by-play for what's happening on the political stage in the US right now. It's crazy.
It is. Should we get into it?
Let's do it.
All right. So, just to start, let's talk about the Apocrypha a little bit, because Ezra's Eagle comes from Second Esdras, which is Ezra the prophet, and it comes from the Apocrypha. So, if you go to the Bible dictionary, if you're LDS and you look up the Apocrypha, this is what you're going to see. It says secret or hidden. By this word is generally meant those sacred books of the Jewish people that were not included in the Hebrew Bible. They are valuable as forming a link connecting the Old and New Testaments and are regarded in the church as useful reading, although not all the books are of equal value. They are the subject of a revelation recorded in D&C 91, in which it is stated that the contents are mostly correct, but with many interpolations by man. Among these books, the following are of special value. And it lists the books that are of special value to the saints. And Second Esdras is one of them. So you have it right here in the Bible dictionary that this book Second Esdras is a book you should be paying attention to. It's of special value.
It even has its own little section as a breakdown. And just as a disclaimer, this image up here is not the recommended books by the Bible Dictionary, because I don't think they recommend the Wisdom of Solomon. But apart from that, it does recommend the second book of Ezra. It's one of the first two books that it lists right underneath, these books are of benefit. And it says, what is it? It contains 7 visions or revelations that are made to Ezra. And he's represented as grieving over the afflictions of his people and perplexed at the triumph of Gentile sinners. I think we can all relate to kind of that sentiment and lament today, where you see it like the wicked getting away with wicked things, and we could lament over Gentile sinners triumphing, and the little guy getting stepped on and ruined as the economy goes down the crapper, and you have our politicians openly mocking us, thinking we're stupid, as they continue to dive into inverted corruption land, where it's just clown world. Like, it's beyond me, but I can really relate to what it's saying, like Ezra's perplexion here. The book is marked by a tone of deep melancholy. The only note of consolation is presented in the thought of the retribution that is to fall upon the heads of the Gentiles who have crushed the Jews. The references to the Messiah, and then it lists several chapters and verses. And funny enough, most of these, or the majorities, here are the ones in chapter 12 and the ones in chapter 13, we're going to talk about today. So like they've specifically mentioned these ones, Ezra's Eagle chapters and the prophecy immediately after, as mentioning the Messiah as being useful for the saints, as being something to help connect us, the Old Testament to the New Testament, and seeing prophecy as a complete picture. So I just really love it. It's important to note that it was included in the original King James version of the Bible. This is a snapshot of a 1611 version, and it's got it nestled right there between the Old Testament and the New Testament. All those books that we just mentioned. And it wasn't until the 1800s, at the rise of the dispensation of deceit that we've been talking about, in parallel to the church, that you have these texts that were removed from most of the Bibles that were being printed by primarily this society called the British and Foreign Bible Society, BFBS. And they were established in the early 1800s to help promulgate Christian texts, Bible texts versus commentaries, that kind of stuff. And I'm sure, like everything with good intentions, it started out and was doing its job. But then there was a big debate in the 1820s. They call it the Apocrypha controversy, actually. There's a whole, I snipped this from Wikipedia that goes over it. But it says in the 1820s, there was a debate around the British and Foreign Bible Society and the issue of the inclusion of the Apocrypha in Bibles printed for the Christian missionary work. The society did include the Apocrypha in Bibles for use in continental Europe, where it was normal for Protestant as well as Catholic readers to have the text of the Apocrypha. But ultimately, they pulled it out, and by 1885, all copies that they were printing didn't have the Apocrypha. And it says they reasoned that by not printing the secondary material of Apocrypha within the Bible, the scriptures would prove to be less costly to produce. So there's a lot of debate, and if you go online and look at the Apocrypha from a lot of Protestant websites, all they do is bash it as being heathen and unclean and unworthy of your time. But to me, it's just a cool contrast to show how the restoration has benefited us to be more open-minded about these things that have a deeper history than many of the modern Christian world would want you to believe, or an importance or tying back. I mean, this is a prophecy of 2,600 years ago or 2,400 years ago, right? No, 26, I think. And it's amazing how accurate it is and lining up with what we're experiencing today. So I'm grateful that we have a prophet in Joseph Smith and Doctrine and Covenants section 91 that allowed me and others, and I think even Michael Rush, who's one of the first ones I think to find this, to be open-minded about the Apocrypha and looking for the signs of the times. So it's cool. But this whole idea, this push of the British and Foreign Bible Society, to me, it speaks, it's a haunting foreshadowing, in my opinion, to perhaps who might be behind these sleeping eagle heads we're going to learn about, controlling secretly the United States behind the scenes. My suspicion personally is that it's the same king and kingdom being primarily behind things that never let us go in 1776, that it might be these British folks who don't have our best interests at heart, though they play our friend. So that's just kind of throwing that out there. But this society, along with many others,
Leiland, if you're the adversary and you know that this prophecy is in there and you know how accurate it is going to be and that it will cause millions of people to wake up to what's really going on, you're going to work overtime to get that taken out of the text. And so when I look at, why don't we have this in our printed King James versions of the Bible? Dude, it's because of the value that's in there. Like, it's so clear that and you'll probably talk about this, the odds that Ezra got it right are astronomical. Like, you can't even fathom how accurate this prophecy is. And so, of course, if you're the adversary, you want that thing gone. You don't want people to read this and know what you've been doing just behind the scenes or what you plan to do.
I have those odds in front of me. So we'll get into the interpretation that we're referring to. But if that interpretation is the correct interpretation, the odds of it lining up the way it has are 3.9 times 10 to the 35th power. It's like it's impossible. It's mathematically impossible for it to line up the way it has, and yet it has. So we'll get into that, but those are the odds that we're referring to.
I like that take. I was trying to be a bit more judicial about it, but I think you're right. I think especially because I always come at this as viewing the 1800s especially as setting the foundation stone for both dispensations, both the dispensation of deceit and also the dispensation of Zion. That Joseph Smith was in the work of setting the stone for Zion, while all these guys and societies and foundations and their nasty tentacles and subsidiaries, because all of these British foreign societies, whether it be this group here, or we'll talk about the X Club in future episodes, or the Round Table Society of Lord Milner, or who took it over from Cecil Rhodes and his Rhodes Foundation, all of these nasty societies had American and other British vassal state extensions in other nations, whether it was India or South Africa or Australia or wherever it might be, or Canada. They were working the same angles, and we saw their own sister organizations pop up in America in the early 1900s, lay the foundation for the CFR and the secret combinations to take hold of the presidency and the military-industrial complex all through the 1900s. But it was on the back of these ideologues and ideologies of governance, of social structure and social norms, of social justice, that groups like the Fabian Society of the late 1800s were pushing for. These are Marxists, these are socialists, these are communists, and they're all the same idea circling around the same push to get this embedded in the highest levels of government possible. Well, the Fabian Society is also, again, a British society or a British group that is formed to make Britain like the biggest empire possible by pushing Fabian socialism, which is a style of socialism or pushing socialism in a creeping fashion. Augustus.
I was going to hop in and point out that logo on that flag or whatever it was. It's literally a black wolf with a white sheep strapped to it, like a wolf in sheep's clothing. How in the world do you have a public society or a publicly known society with that type of message being portrayed and still claim to be, I don't know, a service organization, good for the community, or, a special club promoting good interests? Like, dude, your icon is a wolf in sheep's clothing. It's wild.
Yeah, I would love to hear the story on how they picked that icon. So that's crazy to pick something like that for a public society.
Yeah.
I'm back. I'm sorry about that.
No worries. We were just discussing the icon they have, their shield of the black wolf in sheep's clothing.
This is why I think it's so important that you put this all in context and seeing the big picture here before we dive into Ezra's Eagle, which takes over, again, 1920s, 1928 is when Hoover's elected, and that's the first feather that we'll talk about. But this is all leading up to that. These are the ideas that are being pushed into the global society that's forming, and that gets really pushed on the global conscience around World War I. This is when you have people like Woodrow Wilson pushing his League of Nations ideas, right? He's supposed to be the father of globalism here in America. But when you look into it, somebody in his ear is Colonel Edward House, who is very close and often associated being basically a handler for British spies, that he was part of British secret intelligence pushing the idea of globalization and being buddy-buddy with Britain and tying us to their military efforts of global conquest was part of the idea of pushing these ideas and funding and getting Woodrow Wilson up onto the presidential scene. In fact, it's part of the Fabian socialist way to first infiltrate and subvert and guide and direct, like a wolf in sheep's clothing, the intellectual class of society. So the Fabian society and people like them, there are many groups like them, by the way, their whole idea is to subvert the educational class so that you have a class of managers that are subject to your propaganda, your way of thinking, that then will basically institutionalize it in all of your schools, your higher classes of learning, your science and tech places, and eventually in industry as well. And that's what they do. They bring it all together. So the Fabian Society, whether it's them or, like I said, like I mentioned before, the Round Table movement of Lord Millier and Cecil Rhodes, which they were also these socialists, very adamant Fabian socialists. And it says it right here in their motto, the Fabian name, it's derived from the Roman general Quintus Fabius, known for his strategy of delaying his attacks on the invading Carthaginians until the right moment. You can tell I'm not like a Roman history buff, and a lot of people will be disappointed that I'm not as far right-wing as my enemies would have me paint me. I'm not. Sorry. The
Roman
name
history
Fabian
is
Society.
fake. I'm now going to bring that up on every episode I do. Sorry.
That Roman history is fake?
Yeah. We'll get into that another time. No. That's a rabbit hole we definitely don't need to get into right now.
No, you have my interest piqued, so we'll have to definitely bring it up. Okay. But the name Fabian Society was explained in the first Fabian pamphlet that they put out. And this is on their website. I clipped this from their website. It says this: "For the right moment you must wait, as Fabius did most patiently when warring against Hannibal. Though many censured his delays, but when the time comes you must strike hard, as Fabius did, or your waiting will be in vain and fruitless." So it's a whole nother rabbit hole. And I think there's a rabbit hole. There's a whole nother rabbit hole to go down where I think we can definitely go over this group as well as some that I've mentioned, like the X Club, the Round Table, because they're the ones that are subverting and capturing the ideas behind what happens kind of on the public surface level. So yeah, that icon and logo is nasty. But think about that too. That's the same language that we're going to read about here in Ezra's Eagle, and that we read about in last week's episode with the prophecy in the Doctrine and Covenants, talking about the enemy in secret chambers seeketh and plots your destruction in process of time. That's the very stated strategy of these Fabian socialists seeking to take over and create a global society, a global Zion, a utopia after their own make and model. So it's nasty, it's gross, and it's coherent. These are all lining up on top of each other. It's not a stretch of our imaginations or confirmation bias to line these things up. So here we go. I think reading it will be ideal. But before we do that, I like the etymology of, or going over some of the etymology of the word eagle, or just the different variants in languages. Like, for example, I speak Spanish, and so eagle in Spanish is águila. And that also is very similar sounding to the word agua, which is the word for water. And in Latin, eagle is aquila, and which is very similar to aqua, the color, or aquatics, right? Having to do with water or the sea. In fact, again, if you type in Google right now and type in sea eagle, what pops up but a bald eagle will be the image that you see. So it's a sea eagle. This is what we see appearing on the scene right away as Ezra begins this vision about a latter-day kingdom that he describes like an eagle. So we'll read it. So verse 1 of chapter 11 in the apocryphal text of 2nd Ezra reads, "Then saw I a dream, and, behold, there came up from the sea an eagle, which had 12 feathered wings and 3 heads." So here we have the eagle coming up from the sea with 3 heads and 12 feathered wings. We'll get into those feathered wings and what they mean. "And I saw, and behold, she spread her wings over all the earth, and all the winds of the air blew upon her, and were gathered together. And I beheld, and out of her feathers there grew contrary feathers, and they became little feathers and small. But her heads were at rest, and the head in the midst was greater than the other, yet it rested with the residue." I think we have a question, or that was posed, right?
Yeah, we had a question from one of our listeners about what the residue is.
And give them a shout out. I think that'd be good. But What is your take, Chris? Just reading that right there. Both of
one
your takes.
day when
just
I
at
write
face
down all the
value.
questions, I will include who asked them. That is not today.
No worries. What's your take, though, Chris, on what the residue might read? Because it's talking about the giant head in the middle is big, but it rested with the residue.
Chris, you want to go ahead?
I don't have a take, so you go for it.
Well, this is going
I
to
don't
come
know
up
what it
later.
is.
This is going to come up later in the show. I actually use this as a hint as to what the first eagle head is, or what the other eagle heads are. But that the head in the midst. So we're talking about anyway. The head in the midst was greater than the other, yet it rested with the residue. So it rests with. Sorry, I'm getting an echo. If you can click echo cancellation. It rested with the residue. So residue is what's left over, right? And so you've got all of these feathers, you've got these wings, you've got the other heads, and the one in the middle is resting. Like all of the work is happening elsewhere. All of the movement is happening elsewhere. And so you've got the head in the middle is able to rest. It doesn't have to take an active role. It is just there. That's how I read it. And that plays into what and who I think the eagle heads are later on in the conversation that we'll have.
I love it. Sorry, my dog started barking. Somebody's knocking on my door here at 9 p.m. But I agree. And my answer is pretty simple. Like I always just read it as the rest. Like it's in the middle, but it's resting and sleeping or not taking an active role. It's passively sitting back and working through proxy through the others. But it's sitting back with the other heads is usually how I take it. But I like your more nuanced, open take to it, and I'm excited to see where it pops up again. So it continues. It says, "Moreover, I beheld, and lo, the eagle flew with her feathers, and reigned upon the earth, and over them that dwelt therein. And I saw that all things under heaven were subject unto her, and no man spake against her, no, not one creature upon the earth. And I beheld, and lo, the eagle rose up on her talons, and spake to her feathers, saying, Watch not all at once, sleep every one in his own place, and watch by course. But let the heads be preserved for the last." So there's a lot there, but that's kind of setting up the whole mechanism of what this eagle is, does, and how it acts and what it's about. So I broke it down here in these little bullet points. We have this eagle, which is a kingdom, and all of the beast kingdoms in prophecy and in scripture are just that. They're worldly kingdoms. Joseph Smith in his teachings, he goes into a lot of depth on this, that God never compared heavenly kingdoms to beasts. So this isn't about the kingdom of God or the church or anything like these are worldly kingdoms just like Daniel saw. So this eagle, it rules and reigns over the 4 quarters of the earth. So it has global dominion, and it has 12 feathered wings. And these are what we refer to colloquially as those who study this stuff as long feathers, or just, the prophecy calls them wings, but I hardly hear anybody who talks about this prophecy calling these wings. It's just kind of it's an interchangeable word. It's the thing making the eagle have action and movement, is whether it's the feathers, the wings, it's feathered wings. Now it has 3 heads that are at rest, sleeping, which are preserved for the last. Now, additionally, there are contrary feathers that it mentions, and we'll also refer to these as little or short feathers. A lot of people probably have heard that already. Donald Trump or Joe Biden, they are considered short feathers in this prophecy, and we'll go over why. But this eagle, it tells the feathers to watch by course. So how do these feathers rule, or how does this eagle reign? Well, each one of these feathers is going to individually reign in succession. That's what it means by watching by course. So each of them are standing up to reign and then sitting down. And it goes over that in the next part. It gives you a little example here. So in verse 10, "And I beheld, and lo, the voice went not out of her heads, but from the midst of the body." So that's a strange thing to point out, that the heads are at rest. They're not doing anything. And the voice that comes out to command these feathers is actually coming out from the voice, or from the body of the eagle. There's the interpretation later that'll explain this, where we'll go over that. But right now, we're just introducing that this is how the eagle speaks at the moment, to let these feathers kind of rule. Sounds a lot like democracy, if you ask me, right? "And I numbered her contrary feathers, and behold, there were 8 of them. So now we have a number to these contrary feathers that were mentioned previously. There are 8, which makes a total now of 20 feathers and 3 heads, if you're keeping count. Because there were 12 long feathers, now 8 contrary feathers are mentioned. And I looked, and behold, on the right side there arose one feather and reigned over all the earth. So this is the first feather to be mentioned, ruling under this new kingdom of the eagle with the three sleeping or resting heads. I have an arrow here that points over. This is the number 1 feather, and it points to, on this big wing, which is actually the eagle's left side, but looking at it, it's our right side. This first feather is what it's pointing to. We'll identify which president that is. It's Herbert Hoover, not a big secret or surprise. But the second president, FDR, is actually the one who identifies why we start with Hoover. And continuing on reading the prophecy, we see why. So it says, and so it was, that when it rained, the end of it came, the first feather, and the place thereof appeared no more. So the next following stood up, and it rained and had a great time. So we have an arrow pointing from this verse. This next feather stands up, and it's the second one, and it has a great time. And what does that mean? Well, it kind of explains. It says, and it happened that when it rained, the end of it came also like as the first, so it appeared no more. Then came there a voice unto it and said. Now remember, the voice that came unto these feathers before, where did it come? From the heads or from the body? This came from the body. So I assume that this is coming again, the same voice coming from the body, which makes sense when we identify that what they're talking about here is the 22nd Amendment, an amendment to the Constitution ratified by Congress and the voice of the people, essentially. And what does that do? Well, it says, hear thou that hast borne rule over all the earth. So hear, FDR, hear, Franklin D. Roosevelt, this I say unto thee before thou beginnest to appear no more. So before you leave office, this is being said to this feather, which is true. This was presented and ratified while he was in office. So it says, there shall none after thee attain unto thy time, neither unto the half thereof. So what is the body telling this feather and all subsequent feathers by making this rule? It's saying nobody can have as many terms as you just had. Nobody can be president for as long as you just did. In fact, nobody's going to get half as long as you did. Or like that's as far as they'll go. Now look at this. If you just do the AI result on FDR, it says FDR served as the 32nd president of the United States from 1933 to 1945, a total of 12 years and 39 days. He is the only president to have served more than 2 terms. And his 4 terms in office make him the longest serving president in U.S. history. Up to that point, it was just kind of a gentleman's game, a nod to George Washington likely, that you served 2 terms and you were out. Now, people had ran for 3 terms previous to FDR, but they lost. I think one of them was Teddy Roosevelt. Another was, I can't remember. But FDR runs and wins, and not just 3 times, but 4 times. And here it says, nobody, because of the 22nd Amendment, is allowed to serve that long again. There are term limits that are placed on presidents for 2 terms. So that's where that stops. Now, verse 18 and 19 to finish off this little quadrant. Then arose the 3rd feather. So here's this arrow, 3, going to the next feather in sequence. And reigned as the other before, and appeared also no more. So everything seems to go back to normal. So it went with all the residue, so all the rest here, residue. Like, it makes sense now that it pops up, like Mitch was saying here later, with the other feathers as well being mentioned, the residue or the rest. So
yeah, it's like everybody else.
It arose the 3rd and reigned, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. As that every one reigned and then appeared no more. So recap. The only thing that changes here in our little bullet points was that now we have a number for the contrary feathers, that there are 8 of them. And then we have this second rule that's imposed, that the second feather rules twice as long as any other, and nobody else can do that afterwards. So moving on, verse 20 of the vision. So it keeps marching forward. The body, we have 3 presidents going down. Now what happens next? Then I beheld, and lo, in process of time, the feathers that followed stood up upon the right side, that they might also rule. And some of them ruled, but within a while they appeared not. For some of them were set up, but ruled not. I think we have another question here on this one.
Yeah, someone just asked, what's the meaning of verse 21?
And to me, this is going to be an indication which the vision itself explains later, and especially in the interpretation. But this is what I believe an allusion or a reference to JFK and Nixon, who would have been elected and set up, but didn't get to rule and reign in their way. That ultimately they were forced to comply with the agenda of the sleeping or resting eagleheads. or the eagle itself, the machine, the military-industrial complex, the blob, the deep state. I'm just kidding, but you know. This is I
was
see it
gonna
as
mention
that if they're set up, it means they were elected.
Nixon is mentioned in the book None Dare Call It Conspiracy. It talks about Nixon's presidency, where he ran for president and failed. Like he was at the end of his career. He goes to Europe for a year or two, comes back a multimillionaire, and becomes the most popular president that ever was. And although he ran as a conservative, everything that he passed was not conservative. And so that's an excellent example of one who was set up, but it wasn't his leadership. He was just a figurehead for the powers that be.
That's perfect. It says I'm trying to reconnect. Can you guys still hear me good?
Well, that was I've got a delay going on because of where I'm broadcasting from, but I don't know when what he heard and when I stopped or when I dropped off.
I heard the end of your statement that Nixon was just like, so I heard the end cap. That was perfect. I agree too. And I think that's kind of where you see here that they're set up, but they ruled not. Like they didn't do it the way they said or the way that they're supposed to. So that's what I believe. I believe it's an allusion to those guys because it's strictly here in verse 20, I believe, talking about this right side, because then it goes on to talk about the other side. So that's what I believe. Those are specifically talking about 5 and 7 here, Nixon and Kennedy. But I have included, just because in verse 20 it mentions again that phrase, in process of time, that same verse that again seems to be coming up in every episode here of Watchmen. In looking at who is the secret combination, who are they, we should be looking for things that are working in process of time. Slow rolling, slow moving creeps. And that's definitely this. So let's continue. In verse 22, it says, after I looked, and behold, the 12 feathers appeared no more, nor the 2 little feathers. So there's 14 feathers mentioned, and that's why there are 14 feathers here on this first side. And oddly enough, when you finish the top of counting all 14 presidents from Herbert Hoover all the way up, you end on Barack Hussein Obama. And so from him, you have a drastic shift in the political atmosphere, in the global atmosphere, actually, right? When Donald Trump becomes the first feather on the next set of wings here. But before that, it kind of has a little commentary here. It says, and there was no more upon the eagle's body, but the 3 heads that rested and the 6 little wings. So here you have wings again being interchanged with feathers. But all you have left, these guys are crossed out, this whole side, these 14, and you've got 6 short feathers or contrary feathers left and 3 eagle heads. So every president of the United States after Barack Obama is going to be kind of a thorn in the side of the agenda of the deep state moving forward. That's what I take from this, being that all remaining wings are contrary feathers. So this then I saw also, that 2 little feathers divided themselves from the 6 and remained under the head that was upon the right side, for the 4 continued in their place. So plot twist, not all 6 of them end up actually being contrary. In fact, 2 of these become double-siding backstabbers, and they go and hide under the right side head, who ends up being the last head alive, actually. So they pick right in terms of picking a racehorse for who's going to end up coming on top of the secret combination battle that these heads will get into as things start to explode for them. But these 2 little feathers, it's alluded to here in the prophecy, they separate themselves, and they played probably being on the side of anti-globalist now, but in the future, they're going to backstab us and take things into their own hands, it sounds like. So I kind of keep my eyes open for now. Who's saying they're my friend and against globalism now, against communism, against socialism, but who could potentially be my enemy in the future? I don't get too attached to any figure now. Like that's kind of how I'm seeing this as well, that anybody popping up in the near future, presidentially, geopolitically, whatever it might be, you got to look at them with an extreme side eye and a clear vision of what this prophecy says.
Leiland,
so last verse in this section in 25 says, and
you're kind of making it sound like the right side means conservatism in this. Is that what you're trying to say? I'm not sure I'm on board with the right side meaning conservatism.
Nope, didn't. That's not what I mean. So I'm glad you bring that up, because I think a lot of people assume that when you're talking
Oh,
left
okay.
and right sides of the eagle. Yeah, no, definitely not. They're all right side, because Joe Biden is not Mr. Conservative. Neither is Donald Trump, if you want to put it that way. Like, if you want to play that, maybe people in his
Yeah.
ear, like
Okay.
Steve Bannon, who are really are tied to like far right movements type stuff, we can maybe explore it at that angle. But I don't think the contrary feathers are necessarily one side of the political binary that we currently have. I think it's flexible. I think, like we just explored with the Fabian Society and wolves in sheep's clothing and things of that nature and propaganda, that you can't take anything at face value when it comes to politics, and they're all on the conservative or all on the Democrat or left, or, I don't play that game. I think they're all bad, and you have to take everybody individually. I think there are some
Yeah,
heroes.
that's
There are
great.
some good
Okay.
guys that
We're
you can
on the
look to in
same
Congress
page
that
there
are
then.
trying. Yeah, guys like, I would say, Mike Lee, he's somebody that is in our sphere that floats around our tweets and things like that as well, that you can tell that he's at least semi-aware of some of the prophecy stuff going on and is trying hard to stop a lot of the corruption, or do what he can to expose and point a finger at some corruption. I respect that. So I think this slide's good. We'll move on. Unless, Chris, you had anything else? Any other questions?
Nope. Let's keep rolling.
All right. So it continues on. So what happens? We just finished this side. Now let's explore these short contrary feathers that are not just conservatives on the right side, but just the opposing side, the opposite side of the previous 14 puppet presidents. So in verse 26, it says,
Hey,
and I beheld, and
Leland,
lo,
I'm
there was
sorry.
one setup.
Let me hop in here
Yeah.
with one more thing. So the two that left from the 6, they align with the eagle's right head, right? And so that's, maybe this is what you were saying, but I think that gives us a key that we can use to identify who these eagle heads are or will be. And so when we see 2 change from, hey, I want to be president, into something else, that's going to give us an indication of, oh, this is a right eagle head situation. And again, when we get to the end and start talking about the eagle heads, I've got a theory that kind of ties that all together. It's probably wrong, but I'm looking forward to seeing what you think of that. But I think as we pay attention to what's going on, any 2 that would stand up as presidents or leaders who stand up in a different way and align in a different way, that's going to be an excellent indicator to us of this prophecy and who the eagle heads are.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited to see where that goes. I'm not familiar with what you're alluding to with the right heads or left heads. To be honest, in my take on the eagle heads, I'm not quite sure what the side heads might be. I have a general idea, but we can get to that when we get down into the heads specifically. Okay. So going on, the first feather or wing on this opposing side, it begins here in verse 26 to describe it. It says, and I beheld, and lo, there was one set up, but shortly it appeared no more. So this would be Mr. Donald Trump. And then it says in verse 27, and the second was sooner away than the first, who would be Joe Biden. Now, there's so much speculation between these 2 verses, which are literally 2 sentences that are very short. Like, what is that, 20 words? And everybody wants to say that they mean one thing, or they can't mean one thing, or because Donald Trump was voted out of office, and and people who don't recognize election interference or theft or fraud or any of those things as viable options are going to be hard pressed to believe that the prophecy is fulfilled if they're not open to secret societies and conspiracies who have been doing this since Hoover, possibly doing that to get rid of people who are meddling in their ways. Well, then I don't think you're taking the prophecy at its stated word, or even, as we'll explore later, the Book of Mormon and civilizations of the past that have lived here that have experienced exactly that, the corruption of your government through secret society, through secret deals and connections. So
Something else that
believe,
I think is important in this verse is that Trump appears no more.
yes.
I mean, there's nobody on earth who would love another Trump presidency more than me. Like, I want to see it so badly. But if Ezra's Eagle is correct, he's gone. He's not coming back.
That's how I see it too. I'm pretty hardline on that, in that I don't even think that he's going to be number 3 or 4 here that we'll talk about that actually get removed right away. Can you hear me good? I'm just doing a check real quick.
I can hear you now. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Okay. I like that too, because a lot of the stuff
me
and the
dropping
people I
off,
listen
did that
to,
drop Leiland off?
they're very hopeful that the answer to this corruption is Donald Trump returning to office. So I can already see and feel and embracing myself for the black pilling and the retort, like the response, the recoil for when something contrary to that happens, right? If there is something terrible that happens here, like this prophecy alludes to, that he won't come and return back to office, a lot of people are going to be very jaded, not just in geopolitics and hope for a change and solution positively for this, but maybe even in Christ, because they've misplaced it so much in their search for truth through politics, instead of first seeking through prophecy and the testimony of Christ himself. So yeah, I worry about that. But I would also like to see Donald Trump get in and get his revenge. Absolutely. Like you want to push the pendulum like this as far as they have. I mean, I'm here to sit back and watch them destroy themselves. Okay. So in verse 28, continuing, it says, "And I beheld, and lo, the 2 that remained also thought in themselves to reign." So this would be after Joe Biden. Who's immediately to become next? It would be number 3 and number 4. Now, in a scenario where Joe Biden is removed prematurely from the scene, whether it's by 25th Amendment and his senile state, his mind state, or whether it's through lawfare with his son, Hunter Biden, and the laptop and all that stuff happening right now, easily, I'm sure there's shady business deals and things that can wrap Joe Biden up as well. Now, will they go after a sitting president? Well, who knows? We're in crazy town as it stands, with a former president being trumped up literally on chump change charges, right, and convicted as a felon in an attempt to remove him from the ballot and play this lawfare game. So I can see it going both ways, where he might be removed through some counter lawfare, as that's the weapon of choice for the year. But I just see that everybody's spent all of their energy, Chris, on exposing and going after the other person. That where are the October surprises? In 2016 and before, even in 2020, you had Hunter Biden laptop and the story of there kind of coming out. But like, what else could happen that's going to sway people drastically one way or the other than some type of violence, some type of radical war starting, something of the next extreme? And so I see that reflected, like we had a thread the other day, last week, when Donald Trump was convicted, just to get the heat check, a pulse of some of the top mind movers on the internet right now. And what is their initial gut reaction to this Trump conviction? And you saw people like Tucker and Alex Jones and others and Glenn Beck immediately running to the idea of assassination's the next level. Like, it's murder. And if we're dealing with secret combinations, who we know that's what they do, like, that's not off the table either. And so it's kind of uncomfortable and awkward to talk like this. But the biggest names in the media industry right now are openly speculating the same. So again, to me, it's just another huge witness and testimony of there's some real weight and legitimacy to seeing the world through this prophetic lens that brings calm and peace, to know that, like, all right, it looks like these things might trend that way, and you hate to entertain those ideas, but if the prophecy is true, how much better will it be for us all? Because there is a happy ending here. So
I'll just also throw in that I think I'd like to get your guys' take on this, but for me, we have Biden's feather, which is removed, and then the next 2 who we'll get to, who thought in themselves to reign, and they're eaten up. It doesn't seem like it's something that's just, obviously none of this is business as usual, but it's not like a normal event. It's like, even it doesn't seem to me that you can get rid of just Biden. Like, whatever happens has to, like, do something to get rid of the people who would replace him too.
yeah, well, I think even if it's a legal warfare thing, Kamala Harris is dead to rights as well.
Well, and it doesn't
the
take
same totem pole that Joe Biden did.
Yeah, it doesn't take much to cause a succession crisis, because the Constitution allows for succession for a sitting president. But if you have an elected president who is unable to sit, there's no like succession for that. If there's no president to inaugurate, there's no plan. And so immediately, just that one change destroys all succession. And so these two who stand up to and think to reign, if they're standing up in a situation where there is no president to inaugurate, that breaks it. And they can stand up all they want and be like, hey, I'm the rightful heir. I mean, this goes back to our come follow me lesson this week where, the king's like, well, the son who you all wanted to reign rejected it. So we're not going to have any king's reign. I mean, what a great type for what we're about to experience, I think, where, yeah, you can stand up to try to succeed or secede, I don't know, to take the place of a previous president all you want, but you don't get to if there's no president to inaugurate. So I don't think we have to have a huge like lawsuit that puts all these guys in jail, or some cataclysmic event, some catastrophe that takes the lives of a whole bunch of people. All we have to have is an elected president or president-elect who is not able to be inaugurated. And there's no plan for that. Like, there's nothing in the books that says, here's what you do.
I think it's a cool place to tie in what's going on in Ukraine right now as well, that I feel like NATO and the military-industrial complex are kind of running a pregame plan for what they might do to delay an election here to cause something like that this year, where you have Anthony Blinken showing up over there in Ukraine, literally telling them, hey, we might have to delay your elections because, the war is getting crazy, and literally telling them what they have to do, and then turning around and playing guitar in a club. I know everybody's seen the clip of him playing, Freebird or whatever it was, like Born to be Free, after telling them they can't have their elections. I know there's some speculation that might be a ploy to delay and cause some type of secession or constitutional crisis moving forward. Throwing us into war would also be an easy way to make excuses to do something similar, where you can say, well, I had this wartime and Trump is still a known Russian asset, and just throw that propaganda out there to involve that war more. I think they have a lot of levers that they can pull to make something like that happen, where, like Mitch says, it doesn't have to be catastrophic. Though deep in my heart, maybe I'm dark in that way. I do believe that they won't stop at anything to terrorize us and kind of crack the whip if needed. So
I'll say, to back you up on the catastrophic thing, maybe, is I look around at the world and what's happening in politics and even in culture and society, and it seems to me that they are just losing control at like every single turn. And we talked about this a little bit, but the old tricks don't work anymore. Like they can't get the support for the war that they want. They're like trying all this legal stuff with Trump, and that's not working. People aren't buying it. And so you end up just all of these things that they've been able to in the past get support pretty easily for are not working anymore. And so I then wonder, what do they have to do to get it? And it's not, the answer isn't a good one. There's not a good answer to that question.
Well, we saw that play out. That's a good observation. We saw that play out with 9/11, right? Somebody wanted a catalyst for us to go into Iraq and Afghanistan, and that catalyst happened. And I remember, like, I'm so upset about it now, but I remember I went to the U2 concert after 9/11, and they had these patriotic undertones everywhere. Like, they changed songs in order to be patriotic. And I was like, yeah, go America. Like, let's go kill the bad guys. I'm okay with us sending our boys over there. And in hindsight, I was like, man, they totally psyoped me. They totally programmed me to be on board with it. So I agree that it's very possible, it's very plausible, and that there's a very strong precedent for them to do something to drive these results. We see it all the time with gun control. We saw it during COVID with shutting down First Amendment rights. It's like, if they can create a situation big enough, scary enough, then all the rest of us can justify pretty much any action that they want to take. So I get that for sure. I'm also saying it doesn't have to be that. It can be much simpler.
Yeah. Well, hopefully it's not that. I just especially with the Russia situation, I hate to say this like publicly, but I look at the Russia situation and they're just like constantly poking Russia like over and over again. And we've seen it this week. And now they're now shooting Western missiles into Russia. And like him or not, Putin has been pretty restrained throughout this whole thing. I think he understands a lot of what's happening, and so he's trying to play this as smart as he can. I don't think they care what he does, because I think that they could do something. They still can't get the support for the war. And I think, well, what would be the one thing that would get everyone on board? And it's if Russia attacked America. They don't actually need him to do that. We've talked about false flags in our last episode, but that something like that would get everyone on board pretty quick, or at least enough of the population that you wouldn't have a problem making it happen. And so that's the kind of thing that I'm worried is about to happen in this country.
I agree, and I think there are lots of prophecies that allude to, boots on the ground here in America, preceding some of these catastrophic nation collapsing events, which seem to be what happened here after Joe Biden. Is you have a series of stronger wars, and the nation collapses to a certain extent. I think that's what's expected. All nations are expected to collapse, and so this prophecy actually shows a soft landing for the faithful, that the Lord is going to preserve and help and keep us through the troubled times, just like he has in the past that we read about with the faithful. I mean, whether it's Nephi and Lehi and their journey, we all can have that moment now. We're being asked to prepare ourselves for it, I believe, through the prophet. But I like what you guys are saying. I think to be even weirder, you could throw in the, oh man, I had it on the tip of my tongue. The UFO question, right? That they've already been hinting at this in the nomenclature, in the media, and the propaganda, and kind of soft disclosing certain things and building up the scare with military intelligence coming out with videos and Tucker and all these people. So to me, bringing out the UFOs might be a play. I'm not sure if that's a play of the Eagle Heads or if that's a play of whatever force comes in after the Eagle Heads. So I keep my mind open for that as well. Not that that's what I want to happen, but I'm just saying, if we want to keep all the options on the table, and especially the weird ones, let's not forget that they've been psyoping us and preparing us, for something with the hidden technologies, which is what I believe most of that stuff is black budget, military industrial complex, next wave Nazi flyer saucers. Like, that's what I think it is. So for getting into it, but that could be something that they try to bring out. I don't know. But it could be something as simple as pulling the economic strings with the BRICS nations and collapsing our economy first.
Yeah, I like the idea of something weirder. Like Chris is always saying, we need to be thinking weirder. I think that actually ties back, and it's one thing that we can look for is in Revelation 13:6, which I know we're going to talk a little bit more about Revelation 13, but something happens there. It's talking about the beast. It's talking about the mouth. And there's something there about blasphemies and blaspheming his name and his tabernacle and them that dwell in heaven. And that ties into this UFO question, again, like you're talking about with Tucker. That's something that I fully anticipate will happen, probably, well, maybe in conjunction with the eagle, but certainly probably after the eagle. And I think all of this, there's a great tie-in to Revelation 13 from Ezra's eagle. You go from, as you mentioned earlier, Daniel 7 to Ezra's eagle to Revelation 13. It all ties very well together. And, I've said this a lot to Chris. When the time comes for this great deception, it's probably going to involve a 6'5", blonde, muscular, godlike being that appears and calls fire down from heaven and does these miracles, and people will say, oh yeah, of course, this is what we've wanted to do. It ties in with Albert Pike's letter to Mancini. Like, all of this stuff leads us to this event of a great deception. So I'm getting ahead of myself, but I wanted to throw that out there that, yeah, whatever they throw at us is leading to that great deception that will turn billions of people away from Christ.
I agree.
I think this is the benefit of this prophecy, is that you can look at what's happening in the world and start to see how this is being set up and the different ways it can unfold, and then you can prepare however you feel like you need to through prayer and all that good stuff.
Yeah, I derive great comfort because look, I've been aware of this for I would say I was an early adopter. You know, I caught on before COVID, and I was studying these things and trying to get people in conversation, and that was very hard because people were not very receptive at all to these things. But post COVID, there's been a real change. I've seen Facebook groups and forums and all kinds of things grow with people talking about and eager to look into these things because there is hope here. There is comfort. There's peace, knowing that like we see chaos and we see the acceleration of these setting up events that we're describing, this great deception. We can all feel it, how gross it feels. And there's hope here to see that it was foreseen, that it was accounted for. And it's not even something like in latter day revelation. This is Old Testament Apocrypha stuff that we can share with the Gentile Christians, right? And try and lasso them in with this. So this is where I love it, that it brings so much hope to my worldview, in that I'm comfortable understanding that things will get worse before they get better. So I'm not jocked around either with any hopium that's thrown out by propaganda today saying all things are going to get better, speculate now, things are going through the roof now, or like I'm more even keeled because of my awareness of prophecy, and it brings peace. Okay. Now, continuing in 29 on the prophecy, we'll get through this. We're almost to the end of the actual vision, and then there's an interpretation given. So here you have Donald Trump is removed, and then Joe Biden's removed sooner than the first. And I beheld, and lo, the two that remained thought also to reign in themselves. So here's this constitutional succession of the presidency issue or crisis that arises. And when they thought so, behold, there awakened one of the heads that were at rest, namely, it was in the midst, for that was greater than the two other heads. So the middle head wakes up. And then I saw that the two other heads were joined with it. So here we have the revelation of all three heads, essentially. And behold, the head was turned with them that were with it, and did eat up the two feathers under the wing that would have reigned. So this 3 and this 4, the ones immediately to follow Joe Biden, 1 and 2 are eaten up. Whatever that means. I assume that means that they're not even set up to rule like Nixon and Kennedy as it was referred to previously. But this eating up by the head is a different pattern in the prophecy. It's obviously going to be something different. And behold, the head was turned with them. He did eat them up. And it says, let me read that again because I didn't finish the sentence. It says, and behold, the head was turned with them that were with it, and did eat up the two feathers under the wing that would have reigned. So they didn't reign. It says, but this head put the whole earth in fear, and bare rule in it over all those that dwelt upon the earth with much oppression. And it had the governance of the world more than all the wings that had been. So when this takes over, when this thing happens, when Joe Biden is removed and whatever takes his place, it will put the earth in fear more than the earth has ever been in fear. And think about all the world wars we've already faced. Whatever's going to happen, that's why I think it might be the war trigger, like a World War III, and getting us involved in a modern warfare like that. So after this I beheld, and lo, the head that was in the midst suddenly appeared no more, like as the wings. But there remained the two heads, which also in like sort ruled upon the earth, and over those that dwelt therein. And I beheld, and lo, the head on the right devoured it that was upon the left. So in the end, after all these verses, you have the one head wake up and eat two of the feathers that thought to reign, didn't let them reign, and then it goes to war, or it puts the whole earth into fear. And then it is taken out, and the left head decides to reign, and it's taken out by the right head. So you have this killing of each other, much like we see in the Book of Mormon, of them vying for the governor's seat, and all of them within the combination essentially killing each other. It's like mob rule, mob warfare. So a quick recap. The big things that happen here is that Joe Biden will be removed sooner than Trump. So I know Michael Rush and others like to say there's an expiration date on this prophecy, and that's totally true. I believe that if we're going to be following this and kind of honing how we see things, that we should be looking for Joe Biden to be removed prior to January of next year. So that's where, again, all of our commentary and speculation previously fits into this, what's being presented here. So what happens after that? Well, the central head is awakened. The next two who thought in themselves to reign are eaten up. This puts the earth in fear more than anything previously. The central head disappears, and then we're left with just the right head and the two little wings. Now at this point, it says, Then I heard a voice which said unto me, Look before thee, and consider the thing thou seest. So there's a voice talking to Ezra. And I beheld, and lo, as it were a roaring lion chased out of the wood. Now, again, going back to our big picture of prophecy, we've talked about the church moving in its exodus to the west, like the woman being in the wilderness for a time. So it makes sense that some voice might come out of the wilderness or the wood, like a roaring lion that might have authority as being anointed, kind of like our prophets. So this is how I read this. When I read, and I saw that this roaring lion sent out a man's voice unto the eagle and said, so the lion, or something like a roaring lion chased out of the wood, sends out a man's voice to the eagle. So this is speaking to the American government, this eagle head that's ruling, this right eagle head, the last one here. Hear thou, I will talk with thee, and the highest shall say unto thee, Art not thou it that remainest of the four beasts, of whom I made it reign in my world, that the end of their times might come through them? And the fourth came and overcame all the beasts that were past, and had power over all the earth with great fearfulness, and over the whole compass of the earth with much wicked oppression. And so long time dwelt he upon the earth with deceit. For the earth hast thou not judged with truth. So here you have a voice coming out of the wood, calling out the deception for what it is. That this is a grand deception, and that you are the remnants. You are the fourth beast of Daniel's vision, is what he's saying here. Now, we'll get into the Daniel part in the interpretation, because this kind of repeats when the interpretation is given. But keep that in mind, that this is where the lion coming out rebukes the eagle and calling it literally the fourth beast kingdom of the devil before the millennium, as there were four kingdoms and then a division, the Antichrist, a big conflict, and then the final millennial reign and victory of Christ, right? Like this is all leading up to it. And so here you have a climax point, the accusation from the wood. I believe if this is the church speaking to the government at this point, if this is the church taking a stand against this globalist push and identifying the deceit, the dispensation of deceit rising, the Babylon, this is going to bring so much persecution onto the church, onto the members, onto it, more than already is creeping in with attacks and organizational attacks that are being placed against the church, or the subversive culture attacks that we're getting, much to the same style and mode of operation as the Fabian socialism and the sweeping propaganda that is taking over the world. It's affecting the church as well. But these will be direct attacks, likely from those in leadership at our church once again. I think this might spark a lot of the animosity that will come against this. The major persecution, the real tribulations will come after this point. It says, For thou hast afflicted the meek, thou hast hurt the peaceable. This is again the lion accusing the eagle. Thou hast loved liars and destroyed the dwellings of them that brought forth fruit, and hath cast. Think of that in terms of what's going on with farmers and the warfare on agriculture right now. We can talk about the avian flu, and that being a way for them, again, to attack our agriculture and ability to feed ourselves and to be independent, right? Like this is exactly what I see that passage kind of alluding to as well. It says, destroyed the dwellings of them that brought forth fruit. Think about how many fires and chicken fires and plantation fires in the last many years have been recorded, and kind of like, maybe it's a coincidence. Maybe we're just noticing more. Well, this fits with these plans and deceitful ways of the enemy to destroy our very nature through this long war of attrition, where they're constantly attacking us in slow ways and pretending like they're not. That's exactly what's going on. And
I think there's another translation
with a voice of the man from the line.
I think there's another translation to 42 that could say that destroyed the dwellings of them that brought forth fruit, could actually be talking about abortion.
I love that too. And I think that's perfect as well. When you destroy the womb, literally through chemical castration or through literal abortion, like that's exactly what you're doing.
Yep.
I don't love that, but I like that application because it's everything wicked that we see today. The scriptures were already talking about seeing that happen. Like that's where I take comfort in that this was foreseen and foretold by prophets of old. And it's up to us to understand that and to embrace what the current prophet is asking us to do, and to bring peace to all of this chaos, to all of this confusion, to bring truth to all of this deceit, to all of these lies. And I think that's what we can do individually by educating ourselves, one, about these prophecies, getting the witness and testimony from the Holy Ghost ourselves by studying them, reading them, spending time meditating and pondering on them ourselves, asking like Nephi to understand the interpretation, maybe like Ezra did, right? And if we can do that, then we will have power to convert others to the gospel, to be lights and beacons on the shore, lesser, lower lights. I love that.
Yeah, I
just
think
like
there's another interpretation to that. That is, you look at the dwellings of them that hath brought forth fruit. I think could also allude to the time when temples are closed down and churches are closed down, which again is a great sin in the eyes of the Lord and will cause punishment to come.
Let me go weirder and just say maybe it's a future foreboding of the wars on this continent and on this land that will literally destroy the dwellings of them who hath brought forth fruit. And it's identified later in some of these same prophecies that those who bring forth fruit are those who are left behind, are those who are blessed, are those who are faithful in their works and faith to the Almighty. So I think there's, I like that you brought all those, because it made me think of it more in this panoramic view instead of just one definition and moving on. And then I think that's exactly how prophecy should make you feel. This little, when you step in one, it's like a trap where you can take 20 paths and they all fit and they all witness to the same message in the original script. I think that's the magic of Scripture.
Yeah, I love it.
Okay, we kind of recapped it here. All right, moving on. I think there's a few more things that the lion says to the eagle here, where he says, "Therefore is thy wrongful dealing come up unto the highest, and thy pride," go figure, this is June, "unto the mighty. The highest also hath looked upon the proud times, and behold, they are ended, and his abominations are fulfilled. And therefore appear no more, thou eagle, nor thy horrible wings, nor thy wicked feathers, nor thy malicious heads, nor thy hurtful claws, nor all thy vain body, that all the earth may be refreshed, and may return, being delivered from thy violence, and that she may hope for the judgment and mercy of him that made her. And it came to pass, while the lion spake these words unto the eagle, I saw, and behold, the head that remained and the four wings appeared no more. And the two that," so that's talking about this right head is gone. So we got a third X here on all three of the heads. And all four of these feathers here, they're gone. After this point, we don't see them ever again. And so that only the two that remained are these two little feathers, it says. And it says, "And the two went unto it and set themselves up to reign, and their kingdom was small and full of uproar." The grammar on that always trips me out. I have to read it like 10 times. And fill of uproar. Why not just "and filled with uproar" and "filled of uproar"? And so it makes me think that there's more to this. So I admit, I don't know. I don't know what this will look like. I don't know what this is. I don't know if these two feathers are the product of, again, a north and south, or a second civil war and division that might take place after this rebuking and the head is removed, that these two take up, and it's like these warring factions in the United States. It might fulfill the prophecies of Joseph Smith of a second world war or things of that nature. I'm not sure. I don't know. If you guys have any ideas on what that looks like, that specific verse here, verse 2 of chapter 12, where it says their kingdom was small and full of uproar.
I bet Barron Trump will be one of them.
I love it. There's a tie again here to Revelation 13, and it talks about this beast. It actually mentions all four beasts that Daniel brought up, but the fourth beast is unnamed. So it talks about the bear and the lion and what is the other one? The leopard. And then it talks about this other beast. Well, the angel tells Ezra, this other beast is the eagle that I showed you. And it talks about in Revelation 13 that this beast is wounded and like mortally wounded. And then the beast comes back. The deadly wound was healed. And if you look at that picture in front of us with an eagle that has three heads that are missing, it's like that is a mortal wound right there. And yet, Revelation 13, it's like this beast gets worshipped. It has a wound that is healed. It comes back and rules with tremendous power, and people have to worship the image of the beast. And so I think we've got good alignment here between what Ezra is saying and what John is saying. And yeah, you have a couple of leaders who are like, okay, this beast, it's lost all of its heads. It's pretty bad, but there is going to be some who stand up to try to rule and try to reign. And it's almost like going to be an avatar of the actual beast. Like it'll be an image of the actual beast. So it won't even be the United States. It'll be something else that kind of looks and feels like the United States, but its whole purpose is to turn people against Christ and ultimately persecute the saints and kill the prophets. And that's what's coming after those eagle heads are wiped out.
Essentially what you're saying too is that this is the rising of what Nephi saw in a singular church of the devil versus the church of God, right? Where you have that clear-cut binary that he's seeing in the end times, where this is all playing out in John's revelation and all that. I think, is that what you're describing here? That after the American eagle is kind of dealt with and these feathers and the burning is done, that you have whatever that remnant was be revived and cast to the rest of the world to then surround Jerusalem, is kind of how I see it happen. Is that what you're saying as well?
Yeah, that's exactly right. In Matthew 24, the Lord uses the terminology or the analogy. He says, where you see the carcass, that's where the eagles are. And in Revelation 18, he talks about a cage for wicked birds. And so, yeah, I think we have this beast kingdom that is an eagle kingdom that will fall. It will be held up. Hey, remember, we used to have democracy. Let's have democracy again. Great. Let's all combine into one world government that is against this strange, weird belief about Jesus Christ. We've already debunked that. We've proven that it's false. Let's live a higher law of light and democracy and kindness to everyone and niceness to everyone. And that's what Nephi saw, that is the church of the devil compared to the church of the Lamb.
I love it. I think that, again, as you explore these prophecies and spend time with them and start to zoom back, like you keep doing in dipping into Revelations versus and Daniel and here and Isaiah and Nephi, and the more material that you have internally that you've studied and that you're dedicated to understanding, the more dots the Spirit will connect for us. And I believe, like, there isn't a greater time on the earth than right now to be able to connect dots. That when you start to study these things for yourself, the more that you study, so the more that you study Daniel, the more that you study Revelation, the more that you study Isaiah, the more that you study 3rd Nephi and Jesus' message to the Nephites and us, the more that you study Nephi, right? You start to give the Spirit more material for him to connect dots for you. And when you start to focus on this, the theme of the Messiah returning, the millennium, the second coming, our covenants, when you start to focus on the temple, which is what all those things kind of circle around, that's where all these prophecies start to overlay on top of each other, and you see them as one big story, like we are doing, like we keep jumping to Revelation. Or as even in the interpretation, the angel here will tell Ezra that this is the same thing your brother Daniel saw, but I didn't expound it unto him. So I believe it's the same with all of us, that we can see the same vision. It's the same plan of salvation. This is prophecy. It doesn't change. It's not different for Mitch as it is for Chris, as it is for me. It's the same for everybody. And so as we read the scriptures and the description of prophets of the plan of salvation, because that's what they're describing, and our how to work our way through it, it's going to help us in our own right to be able to live righteously and almighty and be some of the left behind that these prophecies talk about, to see this glorious end time great work of the Lord. Sorry, I'm rambling, but
no, it's great. And on top of all of that, it gives you great comfort to understand all of these things start to gel together, and that it is one prophecy from Lehi to Ezekiel to Micah to Jeremiah to Isaiah to Daniel, to all of them saw it. John is the one that gets to write the details of what happens after this. But man, the peace that comes from saying, or from understanding more about how all of this works, it's like the Lord is going to fulfill his covenants with us to deliver us, to redeem us, to forgive us. And that brings a tremendous amount of joy and peace in our lives.
I love it. So at the end of the prophecy here that Ezra does see of this eagle, all the feathers disappear. I think even you have the final two disappear at the end. Yeah, here they are. Here are the two. They're filled with uproar in verses 3 and 4 of chapter 12. I stitched them together on the slide, but it says, "And I saw, and behold, they appeared no more, the two small feathers. And the whole body of the eagle was burnt, so that the earth was in great fear." Well, this makes me, I immediately jump back up to what the lion said to the eagle, saying, "Let not thy wicked feathers, thy malicious heads, nor thy hurtful claws, nor all thy vain body." So to me, this is the purging, the cleansing of America. And if you want to throw in a pitch for the book, Cleon Skousen's book, The Cleansing of America, read that book with this in mind, with Ezra's eagle prophecy and with the lion rebuking and this burning at the end of the prophecy being, is that cleansing and purification of America back to its roots, back to its beginnings. And this, I think, levels fine, whether it's true or not. The white horse prophecy, or whatever you want to call it, with the Constitution hanging by a thread, and that the church being the surviving structure and scaffolding that keeps the Constitution and the flag flowing and flying in Zion. I believe that this all lines up perfectly and pretty much witnesses or explains how that might happen too. So I like that.
I agree.
And so, yeah, they appear no more. They appear no more, and it says, "The eagle's burnt, so the whole earth was in great fear. Then I awaked out of the trouble of my trance of my mind and from great fear, and I said in my spirit, Lo, this hast thou done unto me, in that thou searchest out the ways of the highest." And so then he asks for an interpretation, and it's given. So the interpretation is right in the next chapter. It says, "For thou hast judged me worthy to shew me the last times, and he said unto me, This is the interpretation of the vision. The eagle whom thou sawest come up from the sea is the kingdom which was seen in the vision of thy brother Daniel, but it was not expounded unto him. Therefore now I declare it unto thee." So it can't get more explicit than that. This is a latter-day kingdom. This is exactly what we're talking about. The thing being tied back not just to Daniel, but to John's same fourth beast as well, which is the same. And so I've got them lined up here. Here's the scripture from Daniel 7. In Daniel 7, there are several places where the fourth beast is recognized and talked about. So I encourage everyone to read Daniel 7 for yourselves, all of Daniel, actually, with Ezra's prophecy in mind. But in Daniel 7, at the second portion, when the angel's telling him what that fourth beast is, this is what it says in verse 23. "And thus he said, The fourth beast shall be the fourth kingdom upon the earth, which shall be diverse from all kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, and shall tread it down, and break it in pieces. And the 10 horns out of this kingdom are 10 kings that shall arise, and another shall arise after them, and shall be diverse from the first, and he shall subdue 3 kings. And he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws. And they shall be given into his hand until a time and times and the dividing of times. But the judgment shall sit, and they shall take away his dominion, to consume and destroy it unto the end." And so here you have a little glimpse, I believe, Daniel's giving into the leadership that Ezra is describing in perhaps the 3 kings that are subdued by this short horn are maybe the 3 heads. And that's what I know Michael Rush puts forward in terms of how that plays out. So you have this all meshing together and just showing kind of how these are related. I just wanted to this is the 600 BC timeline, this picture everyone's familiar with, where the prophecy of Daniel 2 and Daniel 7 are parallel, where you have the image of the man in brass who is destroyed by the stone cut from the mountain without hands. This will come up again in chapter 13 of 2nd Ezra. But this stone destroys this image. It's the same kingdom and judgment of God that destroys the 4 beasts as well in Daniel 7. And it's Adam and Michael who's talked about as being kind of the agent, setting up Adam on Diamond and handing the keys over to Christ at the end. So this is the 600 BC millennium timeline version, where we're going back to when the Book of Mormon starts, when Daniel's writing, going to Medo-Persia, and Ezra's right there in 400 BC-ish. And then you have Greece take over Rome, comes down to the Americas. We talked about that last week and kind of how that descended from Rome to America as being the descendants of Rome. Now, I also have here a possible, and this is just possible again, a latter day iteration or version of those same four beast kingdoms taking dominion globally of the earth, where you'd have the lion, like unto Babylon, being Great Britain, who was, again, dominating in the early times. I mean, that's the king who we're escaping in the American Revolution, right? Then you have the rise of the USSR and war, global war there, essentially. And then you have the rise of Nazi Germany seeking global dominion, only to be consolidated essentially into NATO, Germany being the head of NATO, and all in German heraldry, and their tanks are even called the Panzer, which is the panther or leopard, right? Their planes and things, all their military equipment are named leopards and panthers. So this is Germany essentially, and I would argue NATO as the panther in Daniel's vision has 4 heads and 4 wings. So it's mobile and it's all over ruling the entire of the earth. The 4 quarters of the earth is what that would symbolize to me. And look at that logo on NATO. It's the 4 quarters of the compass and this Northern Alliance and military treaty that has us in its basically in its chokehold, trying to poke the bear, like Chris was saying earlier, right now to start a World War III and drag us into it. And then I would say the 4th beast kingdom might be this NWO, what America, its puppet military arm, has turned into this big thing in itself in terrorizing and changing governments through the CIA and causing terror and dividing up the world. I think that this might be that. But this kingdom gets divided into 10 horns and a short horn who takes over the American 3 eagle heads is how I see it. And so what are those 10 horns and where is that? I think that's yet to come. I think maybe you have an allusion to that with the BRICS nations being 10 at the moment and kind of threatening the Western establishment or this NWO that's forming for global power. I play that out in my mind and keep an eye on those big geopolitical moves happening right now, especially because it's all economy based or monetary based, where there's competing money systems. That's usually the root of these giant wars when you get down to it, is some type of financial hegemony being at play or at stake. So I can see a lot of that playing out, but I just love how it's like an echo of Daniel's prophecy rolled up into a latter day post 1830 version with the restoration, as we keep talking about kind of repetitively here on Watchmen, a dispensation of truth and the rise of Zion through the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and the rise of the dispensation of deceit through the worldly kingdoms of Babylon and a mystery Babylon controlling them in the shadow, just like is described in Ezra's eagle here, with 3 sleeping or resting heads, dominating by proxy the presidents of the greatest nation on earth. Now, this is where you could tie into, Mitch, straight from these prophecies in Daniel. Again, our readers need to go to Revelation 13 to see the 4 beasts that are described there, where the 4th isn't necessarily described like it is to Ezra, where it says in his prophecies, the angel's telling him, hey, only unto you, Ezra, am I describing this 4th beast kingdom in such detail. I think that's awesome.
Yeah, once you consider that
So
the fourth beast is the eagle, representing, just like you laid out there, the new world order led by the United States, or carrying the persona of the United States. When you read Revelation 13 with that in mind, and the fact that the beast was or will be wounded, and that, I saw one of his heads, as it were, wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast. And they worshiped the beast, saying, who is like unto the beast? Who is able to make war with him? And then this segment of blasphemies, and then, the image of the beast being made, and everybody's forced to worship the image of this beast, which I think ends up being the democracy, which we don't have a democracy. We have a representative republic. But what are those agents, the modern day Gadianton robbers, trying to push? They're trying to convince everybody that we live in a democracy. And so it really is an image of the original eagle beast, the original eagle that was set up through the Constitution. It doesn't look like that, doesn't feel like that. We don't experience that anymore. But yeah, once you consider Revelation 13 is talking about the eagle beast, it makes a lot more sense.
I love to, in Daniel 7, if you go before this in the beginning, when he's describing the 4 beasts at first, he describes the lion as having wings of an eagle that are plucked from it. And to me, in this latter-day version, isn't America but a perfect version of the wings of this lion
absolutely
being plucked and ultimately turning into this 4th beast at the end? I like that.
So great.
Okay. In the interpretation continues here in chapter 12, where it says, behold, the days will come that there shall rise up a kingdom. And let me just set this up too. So the angel is responding to Ezra saying, I'm going to explain the vision for you. And so he gives him, he says, yeah, this kingdom you saw is what Daniel, so he's giving him some context that the same things your brother Daniel's talking about are what I'm telling you. Now he gives him a snapshot overview of the whole thing he just experienced. And then he'll go into each character or each thing or symbol and start to define it. So this first section of 6 verses, I see it as a big picture summary. And so here it goes. He says, behold, the days will come that there shall arise up a kingdom upon the earth, and it shall be feared above all the kingdoms that were before it. In the same shall 12 kings reign, one after the other. Again, these would be your Herbert Hoover to Barack Obama, minus Kennedy and Nixon, the 2 short feathers. There's your 12. The feathers, the long ones that reign. Because everything after him, they've all been contrary short troublemakers for the 3 heads. So those are the 12 kings that reign. Whereof the second shall begin to reign and have more time than any of the 12. And this do the 12 wings signify, which thou sawest. As for the voice which thou heardest speak, and that thou sawest not go out from the heads, but from the midst of the body thereof, this is the interpretation. That after the time of that kingdom, there shall arise great strivings, and it shall stand in peril of failing. Nevertheless, it shall not then fall, but shall be restored again to its beginning. So that's where I see his answer saying, you heard this voice coming out of this eagle. You saw that the feathers are these presidents that reign in succession. Now, what does this have to do? Well, it's showing that there's going to be some stress that this eagle goes through, and it's going to be in peril of failing, but that it doesn't. It gets restored to its end. So he gives him the big picture. In verse 19, 20, and 21, he continues. He says, whereas thou sawest the 8 small under feathers sticking to her wings, this is the interpretation. So he's going to tell him what the short feathers are. That in him there shall arise 8 kings, whose times shall be but small, and their years swift. And 2 of them shall perish, the middle time approaching. Let me stop right there because I have this mapped out on my schizo board, where I have all the presidents from Hoover, straight up to Trump and Biden over here at the end. And then here's where the eagle heads take over and all the death and carnage in the lion. So it's really cool. But here are the 12 on a timeline for the times they serve. The middle point of those 12 kings would be the 6th, would be Gerald Ford right here. Right? That's Gerald Ford, I'm pretty sure. Oops, I can't zoom in. But yeah. So you have this being the middle time and 2 short feathers, it says here, and 2 of them shall perish, the middle time approaching. So approaching the middle time would be right before the 6th, and you have these 2 that have vanished. Now it says next, 4 of these 8 shall be kept until their end begin to approach. Well, if we point to 4 here, you have Donald Trump, Joe Biden, and then the 2 that get eaten up by the first eagle head would constitute the 4 at the end. And then you have at the end of verse 21, but 2 shall be kept unto the end. So these are the 2 that sneak under the right head at the end, get rebuked by the eagle, and when that head dies, they're the ones that set up shop, and they're saved for the very end until and before the eagle is burned. So I just like this timeline to show how that verse makes sense when you're seeing it all in succession, like the prophecy dictates. Continuing on, he continues defining the different elements. He says, and whereas thou sawest 3 heads resting, this is the interpretation. In his last days shall the Most High raise up 3 kingdoms and renew many things therein, and they shall have the dominion of the earth and of those that dwell therein with much oppression, above all those that were before them. Therefore they are called the heads of the eagle. For these are they that shall accomplish his wickedness, and that shall finish his last end. And whereas thou sawest that the great head appeared no more, it signifieth that one of them shall die upon his bed, and yet with pain. So apparently this middle one dies on his bed and with pain. So to me, this is again, it's almost, it has defined these heads as 2 things, which almost seem contradictory, but again, expand your vision and they're not. Because I've seen some people be like, well, these can't be a person, it's going to be a this, or it can't be a this because it's got to be a person. Open your mind and think that they're defining it as basically 2, as both a kingdom, because these heads are 3 kingdoms that have been raised up to renew many things and do stuff and bring the end times about. But they're also being described and personified as actual people who perish in very specific human ways. And so that's what these final 3 verses do. They kind of flip it and bring it so that you've got to expect both, that they're going to represent both ideas, institutions, organizations, kingdoms, something that can be defined as a kingdom, but also be actual people. So it says, the other two that remain after the first one dies on his bed with pain, the two that remain shall be slain with the sword. For the sword of the one shall devour the other, but at the last shall he fall through the sword himself. So again, this is very ominous and gross, but fits the pattern of first advent of Christ in the Book of Mormon, as well as all the things that are prophesied of the end times with the wicked destroying the wicked, and those who fight by the sword die by the sword kind of idea and mentality. So this is where we can have a conversation into like what these heads represent.
Okay, yeah, that's what I was just gonna say. All right, so what's
Go
your
ahead,
take?
Mitch, give me a chance to get a drink.
Okay, yeah, that's great. We've gone back and forth on this, and Chris and I have gone back and forth on this, and the reality is, I don't know, but the theory that I really like, that extends that covers the three eagle heads, but extends beyond the three eagle heads. It starts like this. Can we all agree that Biden is not serving or functioning as president right now? That he may carry the title of president, but he is not acting and living the role as president. So it's very plausible that you could say his feather is done and was done when he lost his lucidity. Whether that's true or not, or whether he is removed from office before the end of his term, I think there's a pretty good case that Biden is his feather has fallen already. And so then who is running the show? There was an interesting interview not too long ago. It was that Project Veritas interview where James O'Keefe does a fake date with some White House staffer, and the White House staffer says the chief of staff is the one that's actually running the show. And if Kamala is not going, if it all came down to Kamala, she wouldn't be running the show. It would be Jeff Zients, who's the White House chief of staff. And so I look at the theory that I really like is that the eagle heads are the different parts of government, but those parts of government ultimately are driven by individual modern day Gadianton robbers. So you'd say, okay, well, the first eagle head is the executive branch because it's operating as its own functioning unit right now, even though it only has a puppet that doesn't know which way to leave the stage and can only talk when reading a teleprompter or jacked up on meth or whatever drug they've given him. And so it's like, okay, that eagle head is already reigning.
That anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that eagle head is reigning and it's run by someone. Even if it's a group of people, one of those people is at the head. So I really like that theory that the first eagle head is the executive branch of the government run by somebody like Jeff Zients or somebody behind the scenes like Obama said he wanted to do. And so that way you can have the first eagle head that is not a feather. It's not, serving like the others before it did, but it is functioning as a leader of the government. And it right now is putting all people in fear, which the first eagle head is going to do. Like we could end up as political prisoners for talking about the U.S. government in this format. They could come and take us from our homes tomorrow and send us to the gulags. Like that's pretty major right there. If that's the case, and there results a succession crisis, what's the first thing that's going to happen? The first thing that's going to happen is the legislative branch is going to stand up and say, we possess the power to choose a president, which they do. They possess the power to choose the president. Now, the normal protocol is to go off of whoever the people elected, and especially whoever the electoral college puts in place. So if there is a succession crisis, the very first thing that's going to happen is the legislative branch is going to stand up and say, no, we get to choose. And if they choose someone who was not elected by the people, or the Electoral College is not representing who was elected by the people, what's going to happen after that? That they are going to be immediately challenged by, and again, it all comes down to an individual, right? Some individual, the Speaker of the House, the President pro tempore, whoever it is going to be the one that's running that eagle head. And immediately when they do that, the Supreme Court's going to step in and say, nope, we're cutting off your power because you're not sticking to the rules. And it'll be led by a senior justice, and they will say, we're going to do it the way that it needs to be done, essentially cutting off the head of the legislature. At which point they come in and establish a rule of a reign of the judges, so to speak, and that ends up leading to the collapse of the United States. And within that process, there are things like 10 FEMA regions that are given power to run their regional little camps or whatever. Interestingly enough, Daniel's or King Nebuchadnezzar's statue that Daniel interpreted his dream of has 10 toes, right? And so 10 FEMA regions lines up with 10 toes. At which point you've got the third eagle head, the Supreme Court, the judicial branch, that ends up killing itself, because the only answer for that is cannibalization. It can't put a president in place. It can't create new laws. And the only thing that it can do is say, we don't have power to rule this country, so something else has to happen. And that's where you get the two other feathers that say, well, I'll take this part of the country, or I'll take that part of the country. The eagle is then rebuked by the lion and burnt to a crisp. So that's the kind of flow that really kind of gels well in my brain, that works pretty well. It's probably wrong. Like, it's probably not it. But just considering the reality that we live in, and how I would anticipate each of these organizations responding, that's the theory that seems to make sense to me.
I like it. I've never heard it. I have thoughts and reservations just because I have other ideas that I've been mulling on. And I think maybe, Chris, you have your own as well. You want to go, Chris, before I jump in with my thoughts?
I don't know that I do. I kind of just take the let's just wait and see what happens approach. Because I mean, it's fun, and as like current events happen, it's fun to like speculate, oh, maybe this is the eagle head coming up finally. But I'm more just like let's just wait and see what happens. We'll know soon.
Well, and
we'll know really, really
and Chris,
soon.
you've told me multiple times, you're like, I don't care how it happens. Like, it doesn't matter as long as it happens to, usher in the second coming of the Lord. Like, that's what I care about.
Yeah, that's the good part. It's sort of like the next two feathers. Like, I have ideas on those. For a while, I thought it could be Trump and RFK Jr. trying to take the presidency. I mean, you could say Trump gets removed because he's never seen again, and then it's whoever replaces him on the Republican ticket with their vice president. Like, there's some things you could say there, but I'm the same way. It's like, well, I don't have to guess, because in a few months I'll just know.
I like that. I'm with you both. I think it's okay to have an opinion too, like Mitch does, because you want to have it make sense somewhat. I mean, it's fun. It's fun not
It
to.
is
I mean,
fun.
It's the greatest show, TV series, soap opera, movie that you could be watching right now is real life. If you're trying to like figure out
Yeah,
what's going to
I love
happen next in the plot, that's the way I see it. So I
Yeah.
like that.
I
I've
don't
also
think
heard too. Go ahead.
I don't think I've gotten to the eagle heads I just haven't thought about it as much, because I'm still more focused on how is Biden removed and the next two feathers removed. And I spent a lot of time thinking about that. And then the eagle heads will become clear at that point, obviously.
Yeah, I agree with that too. That it's kind of like we kind of have to look at next step first before projecting too far down the prophecy. For example, like nobody was talking or even knew about this prophecy until Donald Trump took his position and became such an obvious counter position to the previous 14. that's what I think triggered Michael Rush and others to like catch on, to even notice that this was lining up the way that it was. So again, I think as it plays out, that's how prophecy works. Like the more you live through it and step through it, the more you understand. But it's for nobody, I think, to see it clearly before it happens. Think about all of the people who lived during Christ's time, even his very disciples, some of them who were very versed in the scriptures and understood prophecies, or thought they did, and weren't recognizing it playing out often right in front of them. I think we are witnessing and seeing a lot of the same. With that being said, I want to just give a shout out. I'm in a Ezra's Eagle chat on X, and some of the theories that get thrown around there for the Eagle heads too are the intelligence agencies. That the three heads are three different and distinct intelligence agencies warring behind the scenes, whether it's the FBI, the CIA, the NSA, or the DIA, or I'm not sure. For me, I like that. I like to entertain it just because it brings an awareness to like the spy game going on behind the surface. But at the same time, I think the CIA, for one, would have to be a major player, but they weren't officially founded until 1947. And this Eagle was already up and about and doing things, and the heads were already resting in things well prior to 1947. So to call them specific, even the DIA was formed post-CIA, post-World War II, and things like that. So to me, it's too strenuous to try and attach specific agencies to the heads, unless you really have a good way of grouping them that can convince me to say that, like, yeah, the central head are these ones that are dedicated to homeland security or foreign, counterintelligence. I don't know. You'd have to make that case, but I'm not sold on it, and I don't spend a lot of time myself.
Yeah, it's like, how does something that didn't exist at that point actually rest? Like while the wings were doing their thing, while all of the rest of them were doing their thing, these heads were at rest. And so it's like, okay, yeah, you can run the presidency, and the White House will just sit back and rest and support you. We'll tell you what to do, but we're not going to stand up and run the show. And I think, going back to the theory that I like, it's like, okay, at some point they're going to stand up and say, okay, nope, we're going to run the show. So anyway, let's hear what else you've got.
It has to, I'll just throw in, it has to be someone, in my opinion, who can like at least somewhat claim authority, because so the Eagle heads are like these people who have been running the country behind the scenes, right? And it's easy to think of like, okay, you could go and name some of the banker families, the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, the guys with all the money, JP Morgan, all these guys, or go even more anciently, like we talked about with the Black or the Gray Pope, the Black Pope, whatever, some of those Italian families. But it's like if the country kind of collapsed and like a Rothschild was like, I'm now in charge, nobody in the country would like be cool with that. They'd just be like, I don't know who you are. I don't care. Like, you're not in charge of anything. So it has to be someone who can at least have some kind of claim to authority.
Yeah, and I've had conversations with people for quite a while about, Obama came out and said, I would love to be president. I just don't want to be the front man. I want to work behind the scenes. And so you could have a former president who's like, well, I've done this before. I hold the office, or did hold the office. And so I've been advising Joe this whole time. So because we have a succession crisis, I was running the show anyway, so let me run the show. Like, I think that's quite plausible, especially with the presidency. But beyond that, I don't know.
I do think I'm all over here like, I don't have any opinion, and then I just keep interrupting everybody to give my opinion.
I love it. I love both of these.
I do think the first head will be, there's a good chance it'll be like a general, some type of military guy who, he puts the world in fear by retaliating against whatever false flag happened to take out all the feathers we're looking at right now.
Yeah, I think that's one way. In fact, I lean more to that it's a military person, but that would be in alliance or have fidelity to NATO or the crown, because I see these kingdoms perhaps being the same ancient boogeyman of the revolution, that the first head to stand up might be the king, the crown, King Charles. And so you have all the drama and everything with him taking the throne and rising to power, and perhaps his blood red self-portrait is a foreshadow of his future World War III position to basically take control of his vassal state America, who's been a good child on her experiment, but it has failed horribly, right? Like, and he'll say some and claim authority there. I could see something like that happen, whether it's him directly or an agent of British intelligence that's somewhere in the military. Like, I've thrown the idea around, and people throw like George Soros' name as the Antichrist, which I don't think is true, but I could see him or people in that sphere taking control of the government through some plot or scheme and being faithful to the crown and to Britain, which would mean I would have to assign the other two heads to other nation states that would be rising to power now and competing, which maybe one's Saudi Arabia, maybe one is Russia, maybe one is, I don't know, maybe one's China, one's Russia. I tend to think of them though, as outside foreign nations or Bukele. In truth, I don't know if it was on the recorded or if it was in our pregame chat, but I do see him kind of as a Moroni here on the Western Hemisphere, who's taking the example of Moroni in the Book of Mormon and fighting against the secret combinations, eradicating them from his dominion, and bringing peace to his people. I think all of us should be following that example, but clearly we don't, and that's why the prophecy of the eagle being burned is prophesied, and that it fits in with all of the other ominous, destructive conclusions to the prophecies of our land by other prophets as well. So to me, it's too much of the witnesses. We're too far gone. The witness is that the faithful will be able to survive because of our covenants. But in terms of all of the nations of the world, including our great American nation, which I love greatly, I think we have to expect that it will be on the decline. So I tend to think. You could
also
go ahead.
Get someone, I mean, like the Rothschilds and Rockefellers, that wouldn't work because nobody cares about them anymore, at least in the general public. But you could get someone, like I'm always looking at the political situation in that world to try and find who this head is going to be. But it could be someone like Elon Musk or somebody who's like, well, that fell apart. That was pretty bad, but I can take this over. And people would actually be okay with that, I think.
Well, think of too that he's the number one defense contractor in terms of he has all of the military satellites now under his Starlink and SpaceX and all of these things with his relationships with it. That would be very plausible that he could come in and say like, all right, like, hey guys, I've been an intelligence asset this whole time, and here's the truth about all these people and these things, and here I'm going to step in and take control. Or there are also lots of theories floated around on continuity of governance, a COG plan, where you have the government devolved and given to a small group of people to handle essential functions, right? During a time of war or infiltration or subversion or capture, that this could happen. This could be triggered by the military. So you could have this take place without even the general public knowing, and then have someone present themselves as being the head of COG, as being, okay, guys, this is the situation. All these people are evil, and lock them up, a la Bukele, right? Anybody, maybe not just MS-13 and gang members, but all of their political opponents and dissidents, and then go straight to war and just say, this is all military guys. This has been in the works. Think of Russian spies and all of the rumors for the last 8 years. And yep, they were all bad, and we're going full bore to fix the problem now in Israel, or whatever it might be. I could see a scenario like that, but I tend to agree with Chris that it has to be, in my mind, a military leader for the shock of him taking over to not be so drastic that America just straight up revolts right away. Because if it's like a Rothschild banker that comes in and is like, yes, in fact, we are going to war now. And, it just like comes in stroking his money the whole time. Like, nobody's going to take it. But if it's a military guy and there's an imminent threat and the propaganda of constant terror and war continues to escalate as it is, I feel like that's the much more likely pre-programmed destination for us all, is some type of war scenario.
Oh, and Mitch's theory fits pretty well in that too, where someone in Congress can be like, no, I have authority. I'm like a congressman. I'm a senator,
Or any other thoughts before moving on?
Or the orphaned son of a previous president who is 6'8", stands up and says, I'm going to avenge what you did to my father, and almost precisely replicates Sennacherib's life story from the Old Testament, or from Assyria. Like I really like that idea, but I feel like that's probably a feather component where one of those last two feathers, you get Baron, who stands up. This is like my pet theory because it's kind of cool and everything. But he stands up after everything is said and done and is like, I'm going to avenge my father, and goes through and wipes out, half the country or 3/4 of the country. So much so that, there are no men left, or very few men left. And that's actually bringing it back to second Esdras. We all focused on Ezra's eagle, but there are more prophecies in second Esdras afterwards, which I know we're going to get into here in a minute. But one of those prophecies is that so many men get murdered or get killed in this whole thing. I think it's maybe 16, 17, or 18. It talks about it, but it says, it uses this imagery in there where it says, a man will miss the voice of another man. Like there will be so few men left that you won't even be able to find another man to talk to. And I think that's a very plausible scenario for those last two feathers, where they're like, hey, we're going to avenge what was done that was wrong. We're going to, live democracy by force of martial law, that kind of a thing. And that could be what causes so many men to be killed as they go through the country and say, hey, are you with us or against us? Oh, you're against us, you're gone.
I have two things
with all the prophecies. Just before you go, of of being able to of 7 women clinging to 1 man for one, but also just the not being able to avoid either battle or fleeing to Zion. That it's going to force this binary choice because of the political situation and persecutions. That, I mean, once the lion, I think, speaks, it's just all happening at the same time as these 2 short feathers begin to rule and cause chaos and stuff. But that would be perfect for all these other scriptures that we're waiting for them to potentially play out in this chaos, like our tribulation.
Yeah, for sure.
Sorry, Chris.
Yep. Yeah, and if you don't stand steadfast, and if you don't stand in holy places, I actually think it will be people will be so upset by the reality that they will take up arms and shed innocent blood. You look at 3 Nephi chapter 7, verse 7, where a great contention was had in the land that caused even the more part of the believers, almost all of the believers, to turn away. I think of how many people are feeling indignant right now and want to have justice for, what was done in an unfair trial to President Trump. And I know plenty of people that are ready to break out their guns and go to war and like solve this problem. And I think that sets us up. Isaiah warns us about it a ton of times, but it sets us up to go out and fight a battle that has been prophesied that we will lose severely, that if we shed blood, we will have our blood shed. And what I really am afraid of is that people will sign up for that. They will want that, and they will destroy their covenants to have eternal families and celestial bodies by going out and shedding innocent blood in order to have justice or to have revenge. But those are the times we're swiftly moving towards. And I think that's why we have to stand fast and stand in holy places and say, no, I'm not going to go get even. I'm going to run to the mountains of Ephraim to dwell for protection while everybody else goes to battle for retribution.
I love that. Chris, what did I step on you earlier? You were saying something.
I was just going to say that it would appear that nobody online could figure out anything about the Antichrist. So just take any of the predictions of who the Antichrist is on X, and that could be your eagle heads. Because they don't, I don't know. They're always missing. They're really missing with the Antichrist thing, but it could fit the eagle heads a lot of the time. And then the other thing, this is more just for fun, but do you think President Nelson knows who it is? Do you think he's like, I always wonder, okay, I don't want to go too far down a rabbit hole, but I always wonder at the very top level of like the secret combinations, and they're like worshiping Satan and stuff, they have to know that like President Nelson is their enemy here on earth. Like he's the one representing the church that they are trying to destroy. And I just wonder if there's like a tension between him and the leaders of these governments, and if he knows who's going to be rising up. I mean, obviously we don't know the answers to any of this, but I think it's fun to think about.
Yeah, no, I don't know how much time he spends thinking about leaders of the world and who's evil and who's not, but I think his fruits and his message and his character, his persona, everything he is that he's a peaceable man. Like, he's all about peace, and that he spends the majority of his time thinking about his calling and us. You can feel it when he speaks. You can feel it with what he does and how he acts. And so I think personally, when you're the prophet, especially in these days with an international church as it is, I doubt he spends hardly any time thinking about the conspiracy theories.
Yeah.
I
Now
think
that you
his
say
vision
that,
of what's
you're
happening,
right.
I think his vision of what's happening and what he's shown is more laser focused on what he must do, the levers he's got to pull in his position for the church and the covenants as a whole to be to everybody. So I don't say he couldn't, or that he doesn't, or that he hasn't studied these in the past, because he was personal friends with Ezra Taft Benson and things like that. So like he's 100 years old. He knows twice at least as much as I do, because I'm half his age, right? Like, less than that. He knows so much more than any of us, all of our ages combined, right? Like, so that's kind of how I take it, is that he probably knows a lot, probably has his own speculations and guess. And I'm sure if he asked the Lord would tell him. But I think he's so energy focused and all in on his calling that it's not like he knows not to ask. He knows not to care. He knows not to rumor about it or speculate. Because if you ask, you got to tell somebody. You get what I'm saying? So that's like, if you're the prophet, you know not to ask. That's my opinion.
Well, I think
kind of goes
Enos.
back.
I think Enos is a good example. You know, Enos prayed for himself, then he prayed for his people, and then he prayed for his enemies. And I would guess that President Nelson probably approaches things very similarly, like, help me in my calling, that I can serve well, help my people that they'll continue to move down the covenant path. And I would imagine, even if he knows, oh, it's Bob Jones that lives in Sacramento, California, he's probably praying that Bob Jones, you know, king of the Church of Lucifer, will repent and come back, or something like that. I mean, that's just who he is. You know, even he went and met with the Pope, and I had friends that had major issues with, why is President Nelson meeting with the Pope? And in the press conference, he was like, this is a good man right here, you know, and my friends are like, what? The Pope is a good man? Like, no way is that possible. And I'm like, if you are President Nelson and you understand who Christ is and the nature of God and who we are as children of God, you would be like, this man is a son of God. He is God in embryo. Like, it's unfathomable for us as human beings to even consider how valuable this person's soul is. So I'm okay saying this is a good man in spite of everything else. That's kind of how I think he would look at it. And then I'm like, well, I have to be better, because I'm super willing to condemn everybody out there in politics and everybody out there in finance and entertainment and, you know, healthcare and legal and just the whole thing. And so, you know, I need to step it up and follow his example to think celestial, like he's asked us to do.
It reminds me of something I just heard Morgan Philpott talk about on one of his videos, that like I can get caught up in this whole like drama in my head that there's like this Hollywood movie going on between good and bad, but politics is not something. I think it's Morgan who points out, like, the word politics is not in scripture. Like, it's not God's system. He doesn't need politics. And President Nelson is not worried about that. He's worried about gathering Israel and making sure people go to the temple. That's what he's focused on. And I don't think, you're probably right, he probably doesn't care that much about the politics, as long as it's not affecting those things.
That's why I continually say, when people are like, what are we going to do about this? I'm like, well, I'll tell you what we're not going to do. We're not going to go take up arms and shed innocent blood. But what we are going to do is go visit our neighbors. We're going to go minister to them, make sure that they're okay, spend time with them, love them, testify to them, serve them. That's what we're going to do. And it sounds very trite and Pollyannish, but the best experiences in my life outside of my family have been in the homes of my neighbors as I strive to serve them. We need more of that.
I love that. And it's not to say that our prophets don't understand conspiracy, the signs of the times, the
Right.
movement of the kingdoms of the earth, because clearly you listen to Elder Bednar in his commentary post-COVID and what happened. He's clearly aware of the overstep of the government, the tyranny that is creeping. Like the Elder Oaks as well, President Oaks has talked extensively about, I mean, one of his talks was about in the year of 2020 during the stolen election, right? I'll say it, that he was talking about the voice of the people needs to be honored according to the Constitution, essentially laying a groundwork of like, hey, these are the laws, these are what we believe, these are the things we should be living, but we're not, clearly. And there are some people who take that to say like, see, accept the elections, accept what happened. But it's like, if you look at it, they are just laying out and saying truth, and the truth will stand by itself to basically be the trap that this pit, it will be the pit themselves, you know, that they're digging themselves, is that they fall because of the truth. Their lies can't hold up. And that's why I think we just see a steady movement from the brethren, because we know we have the truth. There's no reason to get caught up in the speculation of the time, that every doctrine to and fro and interpretation of Ezra's eagle that you see online, when you can stay steady focused on the important facts, which are, hey, am I recommended for the temple? Hey, do I have the constant companionship of the Holy Ghost? Do I have a witness and testimony of Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior? Like, do I understand that the Book of Mormon is true and the church has been restored? Those are the main things that are going to protect us from the coming chaos, which is going to involve divine intervention and things we have never seen before. So stay on it.
They're very informed on all topics. You got Elder Gong talking about AI. You've got, I mean, they are current. They know what's happening. And so, I would expect that they're up to speed on all of this 10,000 times more than we are. And yet they choose to focus on establishing the kingdom, helping people move forward in the covenant path, serving others, and being disciples of Christ. It's amazing, inspiring.
The end of the prophecy here, or the interpretation from Uriel to Ezra, ends like this. It says, and whereas thou sawest two feathers under the wing passing over the head that is on the right side, it signifieth that these are they whom the highest hath kept unto their end. This is the small kingdom and full of trouble, as thou sawest. So we already talked about some of that. But it's just in the interpretation, they're being identified and singled out as full of trouble, which again would fit with this idea of after the lion rebukes, it brings on a season of tribulation and trouble, not just for the saints, but the whole world, as the eagle is eventually burned itself. So in the lion whom thou sawest rising up out of the wood and roaring and speaking to the eagle and rebuking her for her unrighteousness with all the words which thou hast heard, this is the anointed, which the highest hath kept for them and for their wickedness unto the end. He shall reprove them and shall upbraid them with their cruelty. For he shall set them before him alive in judgment and shall rebuke them and correct them. For the rest of my people shall he deliver with mercy, those who have been pressed upon my borders, and he shall make them joyful until the coming of the day of judgment, whereof I have spoken unto thee from the beginning. This is the dream that thou sawest, and these are the interpretations. So again, he kind of recaps and ends his interpretation and giving that to Ezra the same way he started it, with the big picture. This is how it ends. And it's a showdown between this kingdom full of trouble versus the anointed and his kingdom of Zion, is how I see that. When, Christ literally means the anointed. So this is the anointed, the lion that comes out and sends it through the voice of a man. The prophet, President Nelson, is the voice of the Lord. He is the voice of the anointed. He is literally the anointed prophet of the anointed. So if there were to be a word to be delivered from Christ himself, I would expect it to come through the prophets. Now, I'm open to it being a heavenly messenger, right? Because guess what? If it's an angel or a translated being or a Joseph Smith or whoever, it's still going to be from an anointed, because they'll be prophets, priests, kings, whatever their titles are going to be in like a subset of Jesus Christ in righteousness. So that's where I stand on kind of the end of that. We can move on unless you guys got something else.
Just a quick comment. I love that you put the logo of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints on there, and which now contains obviously the image of Christ. I think we're already seeing it, where as times get more difficult, people are turning to Christ, which is the design, right? When the Lord sends calamities and trials and tribulations, it's not just to punish us. He wants us to humble ourselves. Oftentimes we have to be compelled to be humble, to turn to Christ, so that then we can be blessed. And I think the time comes, we talked about the Antichrist and this, my idea of this 6'5" blonde guy from outer space or from another dimension or whatever saying, no, we gave you Christ as the opiate of the masses, or, Jesus wasn't real. Here's the real light. There will still be 1 billion, 2 billion people that say, no, I know Jesus Christ. I have felt him. I follow him. I regard his teachings, but he is not found anywhere. And then they will find the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the logo, because we're not going to back off of that. No matter what is published or what is, quote unquote, revealed, we know who Christ is. And even though the world may turn, I think there will be many, many people who say, no, those guys, I may not agree with them with everything, but they have Christ and they're the only ones left standing for Christ. And I think that is truly the work of the Father begins where Israel is gathered under the banner of Christ. And that leads us into, Christ being among us. In 3 Nephi chapter 21, Christ says, you will be a remnant, you will build the new Jerusalem, and I will be among you. And that's coming, and that's pretty dang exciting. Imagine, the peace that the Nephites had after he came and ministered to them. We're going to have that. That's something worth living for.
Amen. I love it. I love too that one thing I forgot that just came to me now is that one thing I keep in mind with this eagle head as it I have a sneaking feeling that just as Donald Trump gained and garnered the populist energy and used that to his advantage in his cause against the eagle, I think they will try to capture that. And so I would expect the first eagle head to be trying to ride or use the America First MAGA Trump support after Trump is removed. Look and beware of whoever is trying to harness that energy, is what I would say. I think they've learned from him and would probably try to repeat that, to take that energy and again get back into their shenanigans.
Just I agree with that. It is pretty interesting to me to see so many commenters come out or convert to America First patriotism, like this right wing type thing, and they explode. Look at Tucker Carlson right now. He was the bow tie wearing like dude from wherever he's from, back east somewhere. And then he came out as, no, wait, after COVID, now I'm conservative. And now he's the top bill out there. I agree. That's something we really need to be wary of.
I think you reminded me of your previous comment on this slide about the church logo. It reminded me of President Nelson's statements that we will see miraculous indications that this is the Lord's church between now and when he comes again. To me, that echoes in my mind when I reread and see this section in Ezra's Eagle about the lion and the man sent to rebuke the eagle in that form, and that it fits to what you're saying, and that the world will see that the Lord Jesus Christ is behind this lion that comes out of the wilderness to stand up for truth and common sense and principles of righteousness. And Zion, it'll be this banner that's illuminated even more than we like to think that it is now. As we, see on television or on YouTube or on our devices, we can watch conference from anywhere in the world and we see the Salt Lake Temple and it's on a mountain and we think there's Zion, that's the end sign. I'm saying expect more. Expect that there will be an end sign that is cosmic in nature, that everyone, the whole world will not be able to deny that the Lord of heaven or whoever controls the powers of heaven will be on the side of those who call out this eagle, on the side of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. That's kind of how I see, at least I was reminded of President Nelson's words as you were talking. So that was cool.
I love it.
I'm just going to throw this idea out. Do we want to do 2 parts? Because
I'm okay.
We're like
we've already gone
almost
a bit.
We're almost 2.5 hours in. We're like halfway through the presentation, which is great. I love it. But maybe we just do a little teaser here.
Well, I
don't know. What do you guys think?
I really don't want to shortchange cosmic stuff that we have coming up. And so, and
Yeah, that's how I feel.
I think it merits a good hour and a half, unless, I mean, Leiland, you know the material more. But I think it merits its own, because it's a new reality that we'll be stepping into. And it's pretty freaking mind blowing what has been foretold.
Let's do this then, because I actually, as I was putting the slides together, I really, for whatever reason, wanted to, because I broke down the next chapter in 2nd Esdras, chapter 13, which is another vision that Ezra sees a man come from heaven riding on a mountain that he doesn't know where it's made from. And then he basically fights all these people that come together against him and burns them with fire. And then there's a lot that happens. It's really cool. But you're right, it's very cosmic. And so there's a lot that I wanted to explain with it. But that's the next chapter in Ezra. That the whole series of visions in 2nd Ezra, it compares so well with Amos. And he has a series of 5 visions in the book of Amos that are essentially describing the same things that I wanted to compare. But again, as I was making the slides, I was like, I already have too many as it is. I can't fit them in. So if we save that comparison, we'll read chapter 13 and kind of do a comparison with Amos and maybe even some Isaiah chapters too that fit. Throw those up. And then really dive into the Philo-Dibble drawing and some of the cosmic things that should happen that are accompanying everything politically we're talking about with the prophecies of the kingdoms of the world and the setting up of the kingdom of God versus the kingdom of Babylon. Well, guess what? The earth itself is refreshed and renewed and changed, all while the 10 tribes are returning and all that stuff to a millennial paradisical state. How does that happen? Well, I believe there's a cosmic layer, and there's more in the scriptures that give hints as to how it happens than I think most people are aware of. So that's what we'll dive into, I think, head first if we break this into a second episode. But on that note, I would like to then jump forward to the end, the last 3 slides, where we bring in Ezra Taft Benson and the Book of Mormon timeline, because I think it snugs and fits very well with Ezra's Eagle, which we've kind of spent the most time talking about. What do you guys think?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay.
Great.
So let me throw this one up. And again, I don't believe in coincidences. So the fact that you have Ezra Taft Benson, born in the 1900s, a prophet of God, again, in the Latter-day Kingdom Church, and speaking of secret combinations within the American government during his time, he served in the Department of Agriculture, right? So he was there up close, seeing, brushing shoulders with lots of people, gave speeches in very important places, and saw the conspiracy firsthand forming. He pointed at it. He warned everyone a lot about it. It just fits so perfectly with Ezra's prophecies anciently that you can't help but bring him in here. And he doesn't just emphasize and reinforce what Ezra is prophesying about the end times and secret combinations working to fool the governments of the world, but he also points to the Book of Mormon, rightfully so, as a perfect timeline example and parallel to what we experience, that we can compare the events leading up to the second coming and the things that we as Gentile nations are going to experience and face to exactly what Moroni and Mormon laid out in their compendium of the Nephite and Jaredite records, where both these civilizations, their downfall was the exact same thing. Conspiracy within the government, killing for gain, essentially. It's the doctrine of Satan from the very beginning. And even then, Cain and his covenants with the Satan then, they were performed here on this American continent when you look at Latter-day Saint geology and evolution of the earth. So it's very fitting that Ezra Taft Benson would point us to the Book of Mormon, which again sheds a huge witness to this secret combination and conspiracy angle being front and center as a theme of the Book of Mormon. So I like this quote where he says, "Our families may be corrupted by worldly trends and teachings unless we know how to use the Book of Mormon to expose and combat the falsehoods in socialism, organic evolution, rationalism, humanism, and so forth. And our nation will continue to degenerate, unless we read and heed the words of God, of the God of this land, Jesus Christ, and quit building up and upholding the secret combinations which the Book of Mormon tells us provided the downfall of both previous American civilizations." I like that even the words he's using 30, 40, 50 years ago, whenever this was, that's the same thing that's now coming again to the subconscious and front conscious propaganda mind of the America First and these people who are waking up to be anti-communist again. they're talking about socialism, organic evolution, rationalism, humanism, all these things and their various evolutions in our modern technological era. So a prophet of God he was, amen. Like I was born as he was prophet. So I have a special connection to Ezra Taft Benson. One of his keystone talks was this talk on the Book of Mormon in 1986 in conference called The Book of Mormon, Keystone of Our Religion. And here is where he points specifically to looking at the Book of Mormon as a pattern for how we will experience things before the second coming. So he says, if they saw our day and chose those things which would be of greatest worth to us, is not that how we should study the Book of Mormon? We should constantly ask ourselves, why did the Lord inspire Mormon or Moroni or Alma to include that in his record? What lesson can I learn from that to help me live in this day and age? And there is example after example of how that question will be answered. For example, in the Book of Mormon, we find a pattern for preparing for the second coming. A major portion of the book centers on the few decades just prior to Christ's coming to America. By careful study of that time, we can determine why some were destroyed in the terrible judgments that preceded his coming, and what brought others to stand at the temple in the land of Bountiful and thrust their hands into the wounds of his hands and feet. I love that because the Book of Mormon does. It juxtapositions those two things we've been talking about in this dispensation of truth in the latter days and the church, and dispensation of deceit and Babylon. So in the Book of Mormon, and again, credit to Brother Philpott for his awesome lectures, and he likes to point this out, and so it's very prominent in my mind now too, is that the Book of Mormon focuses on these two locations, bountiful versus desolation. And here you have Ezra Taft Benson outlining too that the Book of Mormon is teaching us, how do you remain faithful and be left standing as those left behind at the temple after the destructions of 3rd Nephi and the first advent of Christ to the Americas? And how do you avoid being destroyed in those cataclysms and living through desolation? And I think that's the binary choice that we see before us now. This choosing to honor our covenants and get out of Babylon and join Zion and join the wedding feast of the bridegroom, or are we going to stay in Babylon and experience the same fate of desolation of the past, being war and destruction? So he's talking about these war chapters from Alma to Helaman to 3rd Nephi. And if you look at all the war chapters mentioned in the Book of Mormon, there are some, a few wars previous, 100 years previous to Christ, and then there are some after the 200 years of peace after Christ comes. But the bulk of what we call the war chapters in the Book of Mormon are here, from Alma through Helaman and into 3rd Nephi. And you look at the time span, from 87 BC is when this first one starts in Alma chapters 2 through 3. You only advance about 110, 120, 100 change years in that whole timeline, the bulk of the Book of Mormon. Why so much war chapters? Why so much this? Well, lay it as a timeline onto our American history and Ezra Eagle's prophecy in specific. When you have our own American version of the war chapters begin with the takeover of the military-industrial complex and these powers using America as their bludgeoning rod to take over the world and cause division, right? I see our war chapters having started with Ezra's eagle and how it plays out. And so we can pattern what happens in the Book of Mormon, the same thing, right over the history that we're living, and brace ourselves for the same types of things and experiences and miracles that we find recorded in these same chapters of the Book of Mormon. Even after these chapters, you have the amazing sermon of Christ in 3rd Nephi itself, and his promises and his instructions to us and what we can study and learn and prepare. But the chapters afterwards, you have Mormon and Moroni kind of chronicling the decline, a battle after the period of rest, a time of chaos again. And then they insert the history of the Jaredites. You have the history of the Jaredites and the Gadiantans and their same pattern and repeated. So this whole idea of a subverted government through wartime period and secret combinations was so present on Moroni and Mormon's mind that they sliced it in as frequently as they could and even end-capped the book with the same. Nephi is seeing the same corruption and division and battle of opposing forces and conspiring church of the devil, setting up a pit for the righteous. And then at the very end of the book, you have the prophets as well, witnessing of the same. This be aware and awaken unto the awful state of man when these secret combinations have gotten above us. So I have a bunch of texts on here. I'm not going to read them, but like always, I'm going to make a a thread with all the slides that we talked about today after this video goes live, and include those so you can read these. But it just kind of describes that pattern. I like this bottom summarization of them, where in the Book of Mormon, you have the Nephite war chapters. You have a cosmic catastrophe, which we'll touch on next time. Then you have the first advent of Christ after that catastrophe to the faithful who survive. And then you have centuries, literally 200 centuries of peace and rest as the Nephites live a Zion-like society, finally achieving that goal. Now, again, lay that over the America history here, our history. America's Eagle conflict starting in the early 1920s in the CFR and all of Ezra's Eagle. Then we will have some type of cosmic catastrophe before the second advent, which we again will read in our next chapter 13 of Esdras. It talks about the man from heaven spitting fire. And then we, after our advent, we have not just 200 years, but 1,000 years of millennial rest. And then just like in the Book of Mormon, there was a time of upheaval and conflict afterwards. We'll experience that after the 1,000 years of the millennium. So they line up really well. And the Book of Mormon is so amazing. If you haven't read it with this in mind, or read through it, or seen it in this light, I invite you to take that journey, because the Spirit will witness as you read through with this in mind, and how you can see it connect to what's going on in your daily life and the current events and news. I'll include this in the slide. You guys can look at it yourselves.
I've had people ask, okay, based on that third Nephi timeline aligned with us, which again, Morgan Philpott does a really good job lining those things up. People are like, okay, where are we at in the Book of Mormon right now? And my answer is always, we're in third Nephi chapter 6, and we're probably in verse 4. And people are like, what? Like, how do you know that? How do you have an opinion on that? And I'm like, dude, because number one, Christ tells us in third Nephi chapter 22, I believe, he's like, study the words of Isaiah. You're going to need them. And so when you study the words of Isaiah, you also study the words of Nephi. And when you study the words of Nephi, you study the words of the Savior, because the Savior in 3 Nephi 16, 20, 21, he's like, guys, here's exactly what's going to happen in the last days. And so as all of that comes together, I'm like, oh, okay, so we've been laid siege upon with COVID. We had our temples and churches shut down and missionaries brought home. We survived the siege. So now we're in that period afterwards, but we're also before the time when there's a great contention that causes most of the members of the church to fall away. Then you dial it in to where you can say, here's where we're at precisely. And so what do I need to do to prepare for the times ahead? And, you know, those of our listeners that have listened to Dwelt podcasts or seen my posts, it's like, I'm focused on those things spiritually and temporally, because I know what's coming, because the scriptures tell us exactly what's coming. And we're so blessed to have them. I kind of jumped in ahead of you as you're pulling this up, but it's like miraculous that we have a timeline. Do we know the exact day or the hour when the Savior is going to come? No, but we can look at the fig tree and say, it's got leaves. Summer is here, or summer is nigh. It's a miracle that we have these things so that we can adjust our lives accordingly to contribute, to help our families, to help other families, be prepared for the miraculous things that are coming ahead of us.
I love it. I think that's perfect and spot on. And I'm not going to belabor everyone on the podcast here to go over each of these points. This is a great just infographic put out by the Joseph Smith Foundation, art by Joseph F. Brickley. So shout out to him. But again, it goes through from the beginning of the Book of Mormon, essentially, just lining it up with the Reformation, even in modern times here, to the United States Constitution being founded, and lining up with the laws of Mosiah, and then Alma starting the church with the restoration of the church and going forward. And like you said, it's not hard to see where we're at. I'm still surprised, though, at how many members of the church are in kind of a stupor, or a happy ignorance about the signs of the times. That they're okay to not really be into this stuff that much. You know, I'm just trying to get by. I'm just doing my job. I'm just doing my thing. And to me, that's sad, because yeah, by diving into this, you're going to expose yourself to some hard things, some hard sayings, some hard hills to climb over. But the power, the strength, and the witness from the Spirit that actually understanding and reading and studying the scriptures brings is indescribable. And it's something that you can't get by going at this with half an attitude. You can't get by kind of caring about prophecy. You've got to be all in. You've got to be all in. I know Mitch is all in. I know Chris is all in. I know most of you listening want to be or are all in. And that's the difference. I think it's our job ministering to those who aren't all in to let it rub off on them a little bit. We don't need to overbear, but I think it's worthwhile to begin to speak our minds a bit more freely about where we're at on this timeline, that we are at a precipice. We're at the very tip of the diving board, about to jump into some hard, troublesome times, especially looking at the eagle heads waking up in this prophecy, that we've kind of been lulled into this position and it's all of a sudden going to be upon us. And so I think that's why it's so inspiring to be a part of Dwelt, to be on the same page with Chris and trying to get this podcast out with Watchmen. I've loved already setting this up, and we're getting to the point now, after going through some of these prophecies and diving into a few more things, that we'll be able to talk and sift through so much political crap going on right now to be able to put them in the right boxes according to this big picture that the Lord has given us through his prophets. So I rejoice in it. Thank you guys for this time. I look forward to the cosmic session next, and I'll give it to Chris or Mitch there for an end cap on it.
Yeah, I'll just say we got through Ezra's Eagle, but something that a lot of the, I don't know if you'd call it analysis of Ezra's Eagle is missing is the next chapters. And so we're going to get into that. And I think it's valuable and worth it. But thank you for joining us. 2.5 hours. We got another 2.5 hours ready to go. So hope you're ready. Before we go, there was one final question related that I think fits this episode. If you guys want to hit it, I think the answer is we don't know. But the question is, how long do the eagle heads reign?
Yeah, I'll stick with I don't know. I mean, I'm sure if you want a date, you can look to Michael Rush and Daniel 11 and some of those times and try and figure out the dates. I don't like to do that. It's a waste of my time, I feel like. I know there are some who have derived great value and spiritual experiences going through numbers and trying to pin down specific things. I'm just not, like, I have no disposition at all to be that guy. So maybe if Mitch has opinions, mine is I don't know, I don't care, I'm willing to wait.
Yeah, I would echo that. Mine is that I don't know, but there are a number of things that I do know about, that we all know about the conditions of the earth while those eagle heads are reigning. And one of the things that we know is that there's going to be fear everywhere. There's going to be oppression. There's going to be difficulty. And like I mentioned earlier, the Lord allows those things to happen so that we will be humbled. And unfortunately, many of us have to be compelled to be humbled. And so I think this is an opportunity. If we're worried about their reign and the difficulties that they're going to put upon us, we need to mimic, we just studied it in Come Follow Me not too long ago. We need to mimic what the people of Alma did and humble ourselves and turn to the Lord and rely on the power of Jesus Christ to make our burdens light and take upon his yoke because it's easy. And so I tend to focus less on, okay, well, this is 4 to 8 years of Eagle Head 1 and 4 to 8 years of Eagle Head 2 and 4 to 8 years of Eagle Head 3, and more on, well, we know there's 3.5 years of intense persecution against the saints. Can I withstand that through my faith in Jesus Christ? And if I can't, I better work on that. I better listen to what President Nelson says and go to the temple and spend more time there and work on refining my heart to be able to rely on the Lord and have that faith in him. And so it shifts the conversation and the thought process from one of analysis to one of work and exercise and action. That's where we want to be, is relying on Jesus Christ, taking that action to build our faith in him so that when those difficult times are upon us, which they are here. Now is the time that we can exercise faith in Christ and have that peace that we need.
Amen.
Amen. All right. Well, thanks for joining then. That's perfect. We'll see you in part 2. Come find out what Ezra saw next. There's some pretty good stuff there too. So thanks for joining.
Awesome. Thanks, you guys.